What seemingly harmless parenting habit is actually messing up your kids? Never saying sorry to them. My mum only just recently started telling me sorry when she gets worked up about something. It's built up such a resentment for her over the years, and I also have trouble saying sorry myself because of it. Tell your kids sorry, especially if you overreact to something they did. Not following through with your promises. If you told your child you were buying ice cream tomorrow in the hopes that they'd forget, and the next day when they ask you, you tell them no, they'll see you as unreliable. I taught my children at a very young age that outside of extreme circumstances, failing to keep a promise made is the same as telling a lie. Therefore, I won't make promises to them that I'm not absolutely certain I can keep. They learned early in life that I take my promises very seriously and I'll go to great lengths to honor them. We've hit very hard times recently, and I've had to delay delivery on some promises, which breaks my heart. But they know that I'll fulfill those promises eventually, and they're much more empathetic and understanding than their peers have been in similar situations. I found that when my parents teased me about stuff that I was clearly uncomfortable with, it made me tell them less later in life. I have a good relationship with my parents, but I don't tell them lots about my life because it's easier if they don't know or tease about it. Same for me. It was usually mild stuff like, "Ooh, he has a crush on a girl," or something like that, but I hated the attention and it made me uncomfortable. Later in my 20s, when I met my wife, she couldn't understand why I was so secretive. I'm pretty sure it's from that. I just stopped telling people things and still don't tell my parents everything that's going on in my life. I love them, of course, and we have a great relationship, but yeah, I'm pretty sure the teasing messed me up a bit. Once my brother was sent to his room by my dad after they got into an argument about something stupid, I used Google to prove my brother right, and we were both grounded for being disrespectful. Until he found out we were actually right, he never ungrounded us until the week was over and only told me he was wrong. Moral of the story, being right is apparently disrespectful. A seemingly harmless mistake is rewarding your child with something when they do something they already enjoy. Take, for example, reading. If a child just enjoys reading, let the child read without getting any reward. Once you start rewarding the child for that act, their intrinsic motivation gets replaced. It's called the overjustification effect. I agree with this, but I also understand that it presents a conundrum if you have multiple kids, some of whom need to be motivated more than others. Seeing others be rewarded for something that you already do better definitely stings a little when you're young and can make you lose motivation. I was a kid who loved to read, and I still do, and whenever we participated in a program that rewarded reading hours, like the library summer program where you got raffle tickets and could win stuff like baseball and museum tickets, I felt like the most glorious scammer. Joke's on you, Pizza Hut. I would have done all that reading anyway, suckers. In a different vein of thought, making finances a taboo subject. Financial illiteracy can be a devastating thing once entering adulthood. You want to keep your children from making your own money mistakes? Don't be too proud to teach them what those mistakes were. And to clarify, I don't mean robbing your children of their innocence by putting the weight of your debt on them at an early age, but rather teaching them how to properly budget their money as they earn it, how to build savings, what credit is and how to responsibly manage it, credit utilization, the danger of revolving balances, not using credit as an emergency fund, for example. You teach them about predatory interest rates and the true cost of a loan, set realistic expectations for the costs of living, stuff like that. Don't smother your kids. My mum quit having her own life the moment my brother and I were born. She was incredibly devoted and a loving mother and was very kind to us, but when we were born she stopped having friends, didn't work and was home every single night from when I was born to when I moved out in my early 20s. She was very easy to upset because she had no other source of self-esteem, and any time I screwed up, and I screwed up a lot, it was as if I had levied a very personal attack against her. In the last 5 years or so before I left, I don't think we had a single conversation that didn't drive her to tears, and I promise I wasn't that bad. I constantly felt cornered and stressed and fell into a depression as a defense mechanism, and she took my resulting lack of performance very personally, creating a very treacherous cycle that was only broken when I enlisted and finally got away. To this day, I often feel like I'm a bad person who failed to live up to her love. Not congratulating your child when they achieve something. A friend of mine never got any praise from his parents growing up. Always felt he wasn't good enough. Show the child that their hard work doesn't go unnoticed. Not creating a safe space for your kids to tell their secrets and make mistakes. When I was younger, I excitedly confided in my mum about my first boyfriend, but instead of calmly talking me through this, she immediately brought my dad into the conversation, they both yelled at me, and forced me to break up with him. If you qualify for food stamps, take the frickin' food stamps. Don't make your kid live on macaroni and cheese made with water because we don't take handouts. Pride can be such a dangerous thing. The health, safety, and well-being of your children should trump anyone's pride, in my opinion. Using them as props for jokes in public. Glad you got a kick out of it, Dad. Not stopping when your child says stop, whether it's teasing, tickling, or wrestling. Kids who have parents that don't respect their boundaries always seem to end up being the biggest jerks and bullies because they've learned they don't have to respect other people's feelings. Mocking them, laughing at them. Adults do it to each other all the time, but kids who haven't been immersed in the background cruelty of our culture for years just don't understand that it's the language of the land, and not that they themselves are particularly unworthy of respect. There was one time I was trying to help a friend at their birthday party by taking their presents to them, but all the adults and my parents thought I was being selfish and wanted them for myself, and joked and laughed at me and just ignored me explaining myself and carried on. I think that hurt my self-esteem a lot in the long run. Well, realistically, it'd be helicopter parents. You always want to look out for your kids, right? Make sure they're not doing things they're supposed to do, walk in without knocking. It ruins a relationship with a kid because even though you have a sense of privacy, the kid doesn't and will always be paranoid of anyone entering their room without warning. It ruins them. Would my mom let me do this? Is she okay with that? Is what they're always thinking. My parents were helicopter parents. I wasn't allowed to lock my bedroom door. My mom listened in on my phone calls, this was in the landline phone days, and went through my personal belongings when I wasn't home, including reading the notes that friends and I passed in school. I wasn't allowed to date. Doing this only prevents your children from learning how to form healthy relationships. You should teach your children how to do things, such as date, in a safe and responsible manner rather than ban it. Not giving them factual and straightforward health and life skills education talks. My parents answered my questions truthfully and at an age-appropriate level throughout my childhood, and I'm extremely thankful for it. Others around me have clearly not been that lucky. My parents relied on a school to teach me about the birds and the bees and have never said a word about it. Luckily, I had excellent life skills teachers who taught me everything. I'm not going to lie, I kept anxiously waiting for the moment when they were going to finally have the talk with me, but it just never happened. Getting them involved in problems they have no control over. My parents felt the need to keep me in the loop regarding our pending foreclosure and argued in front of me over which one was to blame when I was 10. What possible reason is there to share that with a kid? I barely slept for months. I was convinced the cops were going to bust in at midnight and throw us all outside. On the flip side of this, let your kids know if the family's facing an eviction. I was the only one home when the marshals came. The saddest part of this question is that my mum had done so many things that everyone is saying is bad, like not hugging, not praising, telling me to suck everything up. So let me give you one that I feel like would have helped me a lot growing up. Don't be afraid to admit when you're wrong or when you make mistakes to your child. My parents would go out of their way to justify any mistake they made and make it seem as if they were right no matter what the situation was. It gave me a pretty messed up view of right and wrong, as well as learning from mistakes, but was fixed by my grandma. That's a long story. This one seems to be a recurring answer for this particular topic. It's pretty common to think of your parents as these infallible beings for the longest time, isn't it? And purportedly not super healthy if they keep trying to force that impression after the fact. Admit your mistakes, parents. It sets a good example. Giving in to your kids' wants and desires without upholding discipline and consequences will give your kids a large uphill battle to climb later. I say this because my parents babied me a lot when I was young. I never had to do anything I didn't want to. For example, when I started getting bad grades because I wasn't doing my homework, my parents would have conferences with my teachers so they could give me extra credit. I had a rude awakening in college when I realized how hard life is. I 100% love and adore my parents, and who's to say if they did discipline me more then I'd have turned out different? Probably not, but you never know. But I know that when I have kids, I already know a few things I'll do differently. Pretty much telling you that whatever activity that you enjoy doing is annoying or dumb. I used to love singing. I was in chorus and would play my favorite songs over and over to learn the words. Not only did my sisters tease me for it, but my parents told me to shut the hell up constantly. So I stopped singing. I must have been terrible, right? I sing when I'm alone or jokingly with some friends. What really broke me was when I went to visit everyone for the holidays. My sister said that she was surprised I never pursued singing, since I seemed to love it so much when I was younger. I nearly started crying and had to bite my tongue so I wouldn't scream at her for being one of the reasons I stopped. It's always funny for the ones doing the teasing, but it actually hurts the ones being teased, especially when it's coming from people who are supposed to love you. When I was 4, my parents adopted a kitten. Of course, I'd never seen anything quite so delightful before, and I could barely keep my hands off the little furball. So, about 2 or 3 days passed, I got up in the morning and walked out and asked, "Where's the kitten?" And my parents told me that he'd died, implying that my roughhousing had killed it. I was terrified to touch an animal for several years afterwards. In fact, they'd simply given the kitten back to the people they got it from. I grew up in a very strict Asian household. My parents were very strict on the never wake us up policy. To this day, I get very anxious and refuse to wake people up, in fear of being yelled at and locked in a closet. I'm 22 years old. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Telling your kid they're always a winner. We love our kids and want them to feel special, but it's setting them up to be disappointed later in life when they find out not everyone can win. Let them feel the disappointments early on and teach them it's okay. They'll grow up better to handle the stresses of life. Telling them that the family members who are mean to them or neglect them actually love them. Treating crying as if it's something that only weak people do. My dad in particular used to yell at me for crying, which only made me cry more, which made him yell more and, well, you get the point. In high school, I tried to bring up the possibility of me having anxiety problems that I'd spoken to the counselor about because my friends made me go since they were worried. Dad told me I was just being a drama queen. I can't express that I'm anxious or stressed around my dad because apparently other people have it worse. Even now, I'm 21 and seeing a psychiatrist in a couple of weeks because I've just felt so bad lately and I would never let my dad know. I think I'd rather die than my dad know I've been seeing a psychiatrist and discussing the possibility of me having OCD with said psychiatrist, which does explain a lot and is actually kind of comforting for me to know, because Dad's got so mad at me for being weak lately. Being overprotective as a parent, or just not listening to your children. Oh, I have a few doozies. Thinking that whenever your kids open their mouth, they're going to lie to you. Telling your kids that they're just being dramatic whenever they're actually upset about something. And telling them they're being manipulative whenever they show their feelings, like tears. Making them give physical affection when they don't want to. If Uncle Bob makes them uncomfortable, don't make them give him a hug. If Aunt Karen freaks them out, don't make them give her a kiss. Of course, it's important they be kind, but don't teach them that the feelings of others are more important than their own bodily autonomy. If someone close to your family dies, don't say to your children, they're just sleeping. Congratulations, you just created a lifetime insomniac. My 5-year-old understands death. We don't sugarcoat it much, and death isn't taboo. When a kid understands death as a permanent condition, it makes it easier to explain the gravity of dangerous situations. Sticking through a toxic fricking relationship for the kids. It doesn't help. Part ways, be good parents, spend quality time together with the kids, but don't stay together and frickin' hate your lives under the guise of it being for the kids. We pick up on that stuff. It's a terrible example to set. Not having them do chores. My parents pushed me to be an academic, so doted on me hand and foot as a kid to make more room for study. When you're too young and stupid to know any better, you think it's a blessing. When I moved out to uni, I didn't really know how to clean, when to clean, what to clean with, how to wash clothes, how to get them to dry, stuff like that. The only thing I could do is cook and binge drink. That's no way to bring up a kid, and it's a steep learning curve doing all that stuff for the first time in your early 20s. It sounds like a super lame answer, but make sure every kid does their fair share of chores. My parents unconsciously taught me to value external validation over everything else, and it has been the cause of persistent depression in my adult life. Examples that seem innocent, like praising good grades and emphasizing academic achievement, being inordinately pleased when people said good things about me to them, encouraging me to apply for awards and scholarships and then being super proud and boastful to others about how amazing I am, tacking up newspaper articles about me, certificates and other things all over the house, writing Christmas letters that were essentially a laundry list of all my accomplishments, telling me that I could do anything I wanted or be anything I wanted, that I was exceptional. I mean, I think you get the idea, right? All of this taught me that I was only worth what I could do. It's taught me that I'm only as valuable as others deem me to be. Outwardly, I appear poised, accomplished, and successful. Inwardly, I have an exceedingly low, virtually non-existent sense of self-worth. I push myself constantly to do more and achieve more and earn more accolades. I burn out and have panic attacks. I feel numb inside. I don't know who I am or what I actually enjoy because I've been groomed to only do what others want of me. I'm almost 40 and basically completely lost. Discouraging them from asking questions. Yes, it can be annoying to keep hearing, "But why, Daddy, Mummy?" But I've met far too many adults who admit they stopped asking questions because as a kid, their parents would shut them up or be like, "There she goes asking questions again." Inquisitive minds need to be fostered. I've heard of parents instituting a 5 whys in a row limit. I have no idea if that's good parenting or not, but it does seem like at least acknowledging that a healthy amount of questioning is okay without letting it get ridiculous. That said, telling kids they aren't allowed more info after a certain amount may have its own problems. Saying, "because I said so." Telling them they're smart. I'm not saying to not praise them for a job well done, but reinforcing that a child is smart will teach them that they don't need to try as hard to learn. Education should be a constant challenge, in the same way exercise should always be a challenge. If it's not difficult, you're not learning. Saying, "I don't care who started it." I grew up with friends whose siblings would target the one with the bad temper, provoke them into a rage, then cry and play victim when they got hit. In this case, it does matter who started it. A parent has to make it clear that violence isn't okay, but neither is provoking someone into said violence. It doesn't matter that said person never hit or kicked while their sibling did. They would never have gotten hurt in the first place if they didn't encourage the aggression to begin with. Children are clever and they'll find loopholes in their parents' rules. Parents need to be better and snuff out that kind of BS when it starts. If they don't, they'll raise a manipulator and a scapegoat. One will use them and one will resent them. It's a lose-lose, all because of a simple rule. Telling them not to cry or telling them to suck it up. That one messed me up for a while. Creating an environment where you tell your kid their feelings aren't valid just because they aren't the same as yours, or your kid processes their emotions differently than you. Angrily telling your kid that they're too sensitive or dramatic or theatrical or hormonal is just going to mess your kid up and encourage them to bottle up emotions to avoid upsetting you, and it's going to lead to major communication issues. Also, constantly pushing an intelligent or self-motivated child to work harder and harder and to do better. You're setting your kid up to be a perfectionist, which can be incredibly damaging to his or her mental health in the long run. Always assuming the oldest child is to blame for everything. Telling kids they have to finish their plate. Sometimes there's too much food for them. I was overeating for years and it took a lot of work to break the habit and shed the extra weight. Telling your daughter that if a boy is mean to you, it's because he likes you. Choosing their friends for them. Let them figure out who's bad and who's good on their own. Within reason, of course. The words, "Oh, look who finally decided to join us," when referring to you coming out of your room when guests are over. That's a way to ease your child into social anxiety. Never showing up for events. I remember my parents didn't come to most of my chorus concerts. It really sucked to see my classmates' families cheer them on while my parents were absent. I brought home one of my chorus program papers to show my parents, and I found it in the trash the next day. I was sad because I wanted to keep it, but seeing it in the trash, I didn't want it anymore. I love my parents and I don't blame them for not showing up. They were small business owners and it was hard for them to find people who could work for them whenever I had concerts or anything. It still hurt though. I thought I should add that my little sister and grandma would come to them, but my relationship with my grandma isn't great. It's just not the same as having your parents there, if that makes sense. Anytime a child is playing with a child of the opposite gender and they respond with, "Ooh, who's your boyfriend or girlfriend?" that crap completely stopped me from even speaking to girls until damn near high school. I just saw this happen in front of my eyes not too long ago. My aunt started teasing my 12-year-old cousin because she found out that a girl he was friends with had a little crush on him. Well, that friendship ended right there and then. My cousin was obviously really embarrassed. Of course, my aunt made the big announcement in front of a bunch of people. I was really mad at my aunt, like what the frick did she expect? Having kids before you've worked on your own psychological issues. These issues will always be part of the relationship between you and your child. You can't hide it. Become the person you want to be before having children. Yes. And if you don't have that option, work through your issues as you need to. Don't shut them out or act like everything's fine. They know when their parents are upset, but don't rely on them to be mini therapists for you. For example, just saying things like, "Mummy's feeling a bit sad today, but she's working hard to make today better." Just let them be a part of it without overburdening them with your issues. Not letting them have freedoms, such as going out with friends, making their own friends, things like that. I'm 17 and now I'm just getting actual friends outside of school for the first time. I was never allowed to do anything as a kid. I know my parents cared about me, but it's hurt me more in the long run. It's caused some serious social anxiety. I feel this. My mum was very restrictive because she didn't want me to make the same mistakes she did growing up, like substance use, staying out late, and skipping school. But she never explained to me about responsibility, safety, or things like that. It was just, because I said so, because it's my house. It backfired on her as I became rebellious and wound up with a severe substance use problem that I'm only just now managing, and dropping out of high school 3 months before I would have graduated. Hovering over your child. I don't just mean helicopter parenting, which is even more serious. I just mean doing things like demeaning their chores, trying to steer them down a certain career path, putting them in programs or sports they don't like, stuff like that. Constant remarks about the child's body, like telling them they need to lose or gain weight or making any comment about their body type. It goes for everyone in the family. Don't do that, unless you want your child to develop an eating disorder later on in life. Yelling at them. My mother yelled at me constantly growing up, and I ended up learning some really insidious, subtle life lessons and struggling with anxiety because of it. What random act of kindness immediately came back to bite you in the butt? A few minutes ago, in the McDonald's drive-thru, I offered to pay for the meal of the car behind me. The girl at the window looked puzzled and then handed me a receipt to sign, because their order was so large. What random act of kindness have you instantly regretted? I just finished an 8.5-hour shift pushing shopping carts at a higher-end grocery store. Someone asked me to help them back their car out, and I figured, why not? I helped this elderly lady back out of her spot very slowly to the point where it took about 2 minutes. As she pulled away, she told me, "Who'd have thought a Jew could be so useful?" But justice prevailed. Using my superpower of memorizing license plates, I memorized hers, and every time I saw her car, there would be a crap ton of carts surrounding it. She hit them a couple of times as she was backing out and dinged her door on them after I strategically placed them just far enough from the car. Suck it, witch. When I was about 9 years old, in the 90s, my best friend and I were very into collecting Marvel action figures. We must have owned at least 60% of all the marketed characters. Whenever we had a free time, we'd ride our bikes to Kmart and look at what they had. I didn't ever have an allowance, but any money I did get usually went to feed my collection. One week, my distant cousin came out to visit us. My friend and I tried to be cool and show him a good time, but something about him seems a little off. We ignore it and include him in our regular thing. We happen to be in Kmart one day and we see a Super Scroll. I'd never seen one before and I wanted it. My cousin wanted it too. They only had one in the store. We hid it behind some other action figures so it wouldn't be bought, and I went home to get my money. While I was at home, and since my mum had my money and would always ask what it was for, I told her it was to get a Super Scroll, and my cousin mentioned that he wanted it too. So my mum told me I should buy it for my cousin. The thought horrified me. I did it anyway, and he never let me play with it, and I never saw another one at my store again. He moved to California after that, and I never saw him again, but about a year later I talked to him on the phone. I asked if he still had it. He sounded confused for a second, and then told me he'd thrown it away. I know it was a coerced act of kindness, but it was still my biggest childhood regret. And that, dear listeners, is why all cousins are terrible until they reach adulthood. They should neither be trusted nor offered any avoidable gifts out of one's own pocket. This excerpt from the guide on how to be an awful family member was brought to you by the narrator. Okay, here's mine. I was holding the door open for this girl, and then comes another, and then another, and it became a whole line of people I was obligated to hold the door for as my party left me behind, oblivious to my fate. That's why you hold the door open while standing in the doorway. The person following has to hold it open for themselves, and you move on. What happens next is not your concern. Once, I did the reach back and hold the door with one hand for the next guy to grab it and move. The next guy walked right through without looking at me, followed by his wife and 5 or 6 kids, who mostly just stared down at a phone or a handheld game console. All of them walked through without so much as acknowledging my existence. So I let the door go early and knocked the last kid on the butt. I was standing in the line at a very busy grocery store with a cart full of groceries when a friendly-looking old guy walks up behind me with one loaf of bread in his hands. I turned around to him and said to him, "It's pretty busy in here, huh? You can go ahead of me if you'd like." He gets a huge grin on his face and yells at a lady who's standing at the till next to us at the back of the line. "Anna, get your butt over here." There must have been $400 worth of groceries in her cart. There was a long line of people waiting to get their orders at Chipotle. One person asked for an extra handful of steak in their burrito. We really aren't supposed to add too much, so we kind of ration it throughout the day, but apparently everyone heard this guy's order, and surprise, everyone requested extra meat. The manager was in that day and gave me a disapproving look, while I looked back at him giving a desperate shrug. I also ripped up a couple of burrito shells by accident because there were so many more extra ingredients. This enraged the impatient line. Yeah, not such a good day for yours truly. This is a random act of kindness that was bestowed upon me, and I regret not stopping it. So I'm driving my sister's car one day because mine was being repaired. Her boyfriend is at the Naval Academy, so she has a Navy bumper sticker displayed very prominently on her rear window. It's also double-sided, so one can read it by looking straight back. I have no idea why this exists, but I noticed it later. I drive through a Chick-fil-A because I'm hungry and it's delicious, and I realize right after I order and pull ahead in the drive-thru that I don't have my gosh darn wallet. This is a huge thing because I've never ordered something in a drive-thru and not been able to pay for it. Nor have I ever not had my wallet when called upon to pay for something that I ordered. So I'm looking frantically around under her seat, near her console, among other things. It's not a very familiar car and it has a black interior, unlike my car which has a grey interior. My wallet is black. I finally get to the window and, still walletless, I say, "I'm sorry, this is so embarrassing, but I think I lost my wallet." She leans out a bit and looks at the car, which is a mid-size SUV. The bumper sticker is very prominent, from just about any angle, assuming that by some miracle they haven't already seen it. This place isn't in a great area, and there were cameras all over. Then she says, "1 second," and withdraws, closing the window. I twiddle my thumbs and she leans out a few seconds and says, "It's all right, sir. It's on Chick-fil-A tonight." I respond, "Wow, thank you so much." She replies, very serious-faced, "No, sir. We should be thanking you." This is really puzzling, but I'm still in "crap, I'm driving without a license" mode, and stop the car to look further. I didn't find it, whatever. I go home and the wallet is under the passenger seat. I guess I'd made a hard stop and was wearing gym shorts and it had slid out. And then I realized that I had an extra chicken sandwich. This is an amazing day. Only then did I realize that it was because I was mistaken for a serviceman and given free and extra food. I just didn't realize this at the time because, hey, free food, and hey, no freaking license or money. In short, someone gave me free food because they thought I was in the Navy. Turns out, I'm not. Ugh, this question just brought back a terrible memory. My mum called me from work one day because a deaf lady got a flat tire and didn't have AAA. My mum knew she had no money because her card got declined often, so she asked me to put her spare tire on. I went over and it was a minivan with the spare strapped to the underside of the car. The bolts were all seized. I had to get WD-40 from the store to get them loose. I told her that I was likely going to break the bracket under her car. She seemed okay with it. Since it was rusted out, it did indeed break. I had a hard time with everything because the car was in such disrepair. But I did get the spare on for her. She never thanked me and drove off. I did notice at this time that she had a healthy son in the seat of the car playing a handheld video game. He was about 15 and could have helped. End of story, right? Wrong. She comes to my mum's work telling her that I caused thousands of dollars in damage to her car and she wanted me to pay half. My mum told her to get lost. She said that she would get lost in exchange for filling up her tank with gas. My mum called me and I went over. And this is where things get crazy. I refuse, so she says okay, and things are going to get terrible for me. She calls over 2 of her friends. I guess to intimidate me? They both were the size of Uncle Kip from Napoleon Dynamite. Anyway, they weren't going to do anything, but she breaks down and cries. She's going to lose her son, she says. She just needs money to eat. I told her I don't believe her and to leave. So she slaps me in the face. How can she slap? Anyway, the police are called and they tell her to leave. She backs her van into my car, causing a $700 repair bill. The police saw it and said there was no point in going after her, she has no money. So I paid out of pocket because I didn't want a claim that was $200 over my deductible on my history. I saw her once again after that at the bank. She tried to apologize and I told her she owed me $700. She promptly walked out. I regret helping her so much. My goodness, is anyone else just being made wary of literally all other human beings? I'm still going to extend some pity to this lady. You have to be pretty desperate to fake willingness to have a lawsuit to get some petrol. I picked up a 61-year-old woman in my car after I saw her carrying groceries down the side of the road in this heat wave. I should have known that it was bad news because it was 103 degrees and she was carrying milk. So I take her down the street and we chat a bit. I get there, she gets out and walks to the door. No one knows who she is. She lived here 25 years ago and now I had to call the cops and deal with the whole situation of finding this woman's family. Turns out she had dementia and thought that she still lived where I drove her. She actually lives closer to the place where I picked her up. 4 years ago, freshman year. I was selling my PlayStation 2. My friend wanted one for his cousin. I offered to sell him mine, but he had no money. Well, being the idiot I am, I'm like, that's okay, just pay me when you can. Needless to say, I never got my money. I was in a busy clothes shop a few months back when a woman with her baby in a pram were coming towards me down a narrow aisle. Her baby dropped or threw one of its toys out of the front of its pram, so instead of the mother having to push around to the front of the pram to retrieve it, I picked it up and gave it back to her baby. She then proceeded to give me a look of total disgust and say, "Oh, thanks," and then shoved past me to leave the store. Agreed to help one of my best buds, a guy who I'd been good friends with since we were in elementary school, with our classwork. We were the same major at a local college. 2 days later, he rushes for a frat and starts pretending like he doesn't know me except for when we have class together. We didn't speak for a solid 2 years after that semester was over. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Every time I decide to tidy up the living room while my mum is out so she isn't stressed all the time. The instant she gets home, "You forgot to put away the cereal this morning. I had to put it away for you." "Yeah, thanks, I just cleaned the whole living room for you, by the way, in case you had friends coming or something. Why would I invite people over if the house is a mess?" "You're right, how silly of me to assume you had any friends." Every darn time. Helped a lady out to her car with her groceries once. As I was helping her put them in her car, the lady in the vehicle next to hers didn't see me and slammed the hatch of her van down onto the back of my head. She opened her door sometime between trips to the cart to put the groceries away, I guess. I don't remember much, just mumbling that I was sorry and had to go and leaving the lady I was helping as I went back into the store to wait for my husband to pick me up because I wasn't fit to drive. Turns out I had a concussion and I had to go to the ER and all sorts of other good stuff. Later, I guess the rest of the story was that the lady just threw her Thanksgiving turkey into the back of her van and left as fast as she could when she had realized what she had done. Apparently she didn't even ask if I was okay, just gave a look of horror and left as fast as she could. Happy Thanksgiving, you crock of number 2. I hope you rot in heck. Around 6 years ago when Pokemon hit India, we would get these Jenga cards in a particular brand of chips called Uncle Chips, and it was extremely rare to find a Pikachu card. So this one day I decided to buy 2 and I gave one to my elder D-bag brother as his bag didn't have a Jenga card. That jerk got the Pikachu, and he didn't even give it to me. I hate you, Angelo. One year on the 4th of July, my parents were hosting a big barbecue at our house for family and friends. And we were having a ton of people over. My mum was talking about having so much to do to get ready for it and having so much food to make, and she seemed really stressed out over it since we rarely have that many people over. I felt really bad for her since she seemed overwhelmed, and I offered to help out in some way, but she said no, it was fine. One of the things she talked about having to do was make a ton of cupcakes the morning of the barbecue. So at midnight on the 4th, after my parents were asleep, I made a crap ton of cupcakes. I baked multiple batches, waited for them to cool, put icing on every one of those mother effers, and decorated them with 4th of July related things. It took me hours and I finally managed to finish right before my mum woke up. I was pretty proud of myself since they turned out really nice, and I felt good that I managed to take a few hours off my mum's workload for that morning. Later that morning, after my mum woke up, she came into my room and the first words out of her mouth were, "That's all you made? That's never going to be enough. You didn't use the right icing. We have tons of people coming and now I'm going to have to make more," etc., etc. I felt awful. I was just trying to help. I really regretted it, especially since I could have used that time to finish up a paper. God damn, that's insensitive and mean. Your guests can be damn thankful for anything they get, and I'm sure they would have been fine with the cupcakes. This is the moment where a good parent swallows their pride and says thank you, even if they don't think that it's enough. Maybe make another small extra batch if you aren't sure, but don't shoot your super nice kid down that way. I went to help my buddy get out of a pool when he reached his hand out for help. Then he braced against the wall and pulled me in. Jerk. Huh? That's when you put Benadryl into his alcoholic drink later in the night, and when he's bordering on unconscious, you throw him into the pool. Oh, what? Do you need my help? No, now you drown. As a child, I used to collect keys. I had a shoebox full of random keys, all of which I loved dearly. My older sister's friend was over one time, and while secretly going through her makeup, I broke her powder. Crushed and embarrassed and trying to figure out how I could repay her, I gave her all of my keys. Every single one of them. As an adult, I realize now that she probably didn't give a crap about my keys. And to this day, I still wish I had them. My boyfriend lived with his sister and they did their whole cleaning war thing. The whole, I'm not going to put this up until he or she cleans this up bullcrap. I tried to help by doing the chores for them sometimes because the place was disgusting. I was doing the dishes one day and asked where their garbage disposal was. My boyfriend kind of showed me, then went back to playing video games or whatever he was doing. Turns out there was no garbage disposal and I clogged their drain. His sister wasn't happy. I offered to help my brother write a paper for English. He's in college and I'm in high school. I was so OCD about getting him a good grade that I ended up spending 6 hours rewriting the entire thing, until 1 a.m. I regretted it the second I read the first paragraph and realized his paper was complete crap. I witnessed a car accident while stopped at an intersection. This guy turned right in just as an old lady stepped off the curb to cross the street. I saw her get hit, jumped out of the car, ran across the intersection during a green light, so I could have gotten hit by a car too, got up to her lying bleeding all over the pavement and asked her, "Are you okay?" To which she replied with, "Of course I'm not." It was stupid of me to ask that question, but it's kind of a habit when you see someone hurt. I wish she hadn't been such a witch to me about it, but then again, she did just get hit by a car. Maybe she thought you were the one who hit her. Quite plausible, especially with all the sudden shock involved. I offered to help a workmate move when I was drunk. He called the next day when I was 11 out of 10 hungover, after too much tequila, and asked me to come help out. I moved his boyfriend's, and other roommates' crap over a 12-hour period. Just the two of us, and he couldn't lift anything heavy. Up 3 stories with no elevator. F my life. I once had my cousins visit, and the two of them were hanging out in my room. At the time, I'd been saving up money so I could buy something special. It just so happened that I put the $1,000 into one of my purses hidden in my closet. So the youngest asked if she could have a purse, and I said, "Sure, you can have any one you'd like. Just make sure that you check the inside." So she checked the inside, and I had a strong feeling that it was the purse with the money she had chosen to take. She did. I asked her if I, myself, should check it, yet she insisted that it was indeed empty. As soon as they left, I regretted taking her word and couldn't help but check every single purse. She had it for sure. A week later, I confronted them and they admitted it and told me they gave it to their mother, and their mother thought it was fake, so she, quote, threw it away. I'm not entirely sure what happened to the money. I stopped to help a car that had overheated. They stopped about a half-mile from a gas station, and I decided instead of making him walk, I'd go to the next exit and get him water. The next exit was 14 miles away. I would have felt too guilty about leaving him there waiting, so I did it anyway. I had to drive 28 miles out of the way when I had an hour drive ahead of me late at night with an early morning start at work. I should have let him walk. I used to be a night auditor at a hotel. There was only one other night auditor there, and she was a middle-aged woman who also waitressed at 2 other jobs. As a result, she was extremely overworked and would ask me to cover 1 or 2 shifts a week. Every shift we worked was from 11 until 7. One day she called me at 5 p.m. asking me if I could cover for her. I said yes, even though I hadn't slept yet. I grabbed a few meager hours of sleep and headed in. About an hour into the shift, I started falling asleep and regretted the crap out of my decision. I regretted it more when I realized I was scheduled to volunteer the following morning. At the airport the other day, I saw an elderly lady struggling to take her bag off the bus that moves from the plane to the terminal. So I approached the lady and picked up her bag for her, only to not realize her bag wasn't closed properly, so when I picked it up, all of her clothes fell out. Thus ended my random act of kindness as I ran away. I gave away my copy of Mega Man Legends 2 to an impoverished 6-year-old I rode the school bus with. I'd also given him a PlayStation and a bunch of other games, but did I really have to give him a rare game I'd get nostalgic about later? I had the inverse of this question happen a couple of days ago. I was at the airport waiting to be picked up after my flight was cancelled. It got pushed to the next day. So I'm killing time on Reddit, of course, when a young, slightly chubby Hispanic woman sitting nearby begins sobbing. I figure she's just really stressed or got some bad news, and I stay comfortably within my bubble. But she keeps sobbing and sobbing. People are glancing back and becoming uncomfortable. It occurs to me that maybe I should be the one person that gives a crap and ask how she's doing, but then it occurs to me that I could be opening up a can of crazy. At this point, she's getting loud and starting to cause a scene. Before I can decide whether to talk to her, an airline attendant appears and asks her what's wrong. I can't hear the conversation, but this woman is not being reasonable and by now is bawling very loudly. Eventually, TSA comes over, then the police, and then finally a paramedic who seems to determine she's hysterical. I decide I'm a little too close for comfort and step out for a smoke. Just in time to see an ambulance pull up and carry off the woman, strapped down to a stretcher, crying so loudly I can hear it 60 feet away over traffic. I'm glad that I listened to my inner heartless jerk. In short, didn't comfort a crying stranger, and that was a very good call. At what moment did you realize you were dating a complete moron? We were driving around this weird part of Las Vegas and I said, "This is surreal." And he said, "I know, it's so real." I repeated surreal, and he repeated so real. We were watching Django, and during the winter training montage, there is a moment where the camera pans over a herd of reindeer. At that moment, my ex said something about how she thought it was weird that they would include reindeer in the movie because it kind of breaks the immersion. I was confused and asked what she meant by that. She went on to explain to me how reindeer weren't real animals and just make-believe characters in a fairy tale, like Rudolph and the rest of Santa's reindeer. I asked him what event resulted in World War I. His response was September 11th. He was serious. When she flipped out because her third grader came home with the word erect on a spelling list and was on the verge of calling the school. She honestly had lived her entire life not knowing that that word had any other use aside from describing the state of a man's Johnson. I dated a guy for about a month until I found out that he didn't realize that women's chests made actual milk to feed their baby. He thought that describing the act of chest feeding was just a way to hold a baby while giving it a bottle. I told him he was an idiot, and he said with a disgusted sneer, "I didn't know that because I've never known any woman who had or would feed their child that way." I told him that I'd fed my son that way, and he called me a child mistreater. When she thought I was crazy for putting Pop-Tarts in a toaster. Or maybe it was the time she tried making Hamburger Helper for the first time at 27 years old and called me from the store to ask where they sold the brown hamburger meat. I can't believe I dated that. I'm wasting away to nothing. Send help. Oh, and I almost forgot the best part. She's teaching your children right now in an American public school. The first time I thought this was when he told my parents he was a meatitarian because he eats everything. The same guy told me that the bumps on the side of the highway are so blind drivers know when they've run off the road. High school boyfriends. He was hot though. Well, we've all dated the gorgeous idiot. Fun and games until your resentment at the sheer lack of mental activity going on also just makes you completely uninterested in doing anything else with them as well. I had been dating this girl for a few months and it was Christmas time. We weren't super serious, but it was serious enough that I was buying her Christmas presents. I found something for her that was perfect, and it had a connection to some funny event involving her and my cat. So I made the present from the cat. I thought I was being cute and she'd make the connection. Instead, she got angry that my cat got her a present and I didn't. I thought she was joking. To make matters worse, we were at her parents' place and they backed her up. It was extremely awkward and I realized it wasn't going to work out. The moon is so beautiful tonight. That's a street light. You know that, right? When I was helping her with geography homework and she couldn't point out our own country on the map. When she pointed up at a bluish star and sincerely asked, "Is that Earth?" When she surprised me by inviting her mother on our 16-day Hawaiian cruise. She got me Mad Libs, and when it was her turn to do a noun, she asked, "What's a noun?" I said, "It's a person, place, or thing." There was a long silence as she thought. It went on for so long that I thought she must be thinking of the best noun I'd ever heard. Then she said, place. Back in college, I saw a fleur-de-lis tattoo on a girl's butt for the first time. What made you decide to get a fleur-de-lis tattoo on your butt? I don't know, I wanted something tribal. She told me with a straight face that our horoscopes had changed and it was a bad idea to be together. In high school, I was in an extracurricular program after school. There was one portion of it that was pretty much all girls. I dated one girl from this portion all throughout high school. I went to all of their events and helped out. I always wondered why none of the other girls or their parents really talked to me. Right before we graduated, I brought it up to her, and she told me that she told all of them that I was physically and verbally attacking her all the time. When I asked her why, she told me it was so no one else would steal me away from her. I broke up with her shortly after that. When I saw her water her plastic plant for the third time. I don't know, the first 2 times I was sort of stunned and curious. The second time she actually said, "The water just goes right through." I've had this one cactus for maybe 2 years now. It leaks, so I kinda never watered it. At this point, I don't know if it's artificial or organic, but I don't really want to break it to find out. So I just keep it by my other plants and I don't think about it. She kept trying to put food inside the rolling pin and then try to flatten it by just rolling it around. I'm trying to imagine a rolling pin constructed in a way where you could put food inside of it. I've got that classic solid wooden roller design in my mind, and that's all I can think of. Okay, so apparently lots of people here have rolling pins that are hollow, so you can fill them up with water to add weight. Apparently most of those versions are crappy plastic kinds. I frickin' swear to God I'm not making this up, but back in 2006 my ex-wife fell for the Nigerian prince scam and gave out our bank account number. A roommate of mine was dating this girl. Really cute, super sweet. We were all in the living room watching another roommate play Call of Duty World at War. It was still new at the time. She eventually asks if this was based on a true story. We reply that although the specific characters likely didn't exist, the game was based on World War II. Her response, "What's World War II? Are you serious? It was World War fricking II. At one point she even said, "It's not like everyone knows about it." Yeah, Katie, the whole world does know about it. It was a world war, and not the first one either, apparently. When he said the color orange didn't exist because it was really just pink and red mixed together. Was on a hike and was following a trail that I'd read up online. We got to a fork and I said, "Okay, now we need to go north." And she says, "Haven't we been going that way this whole time?" Confused, I look at her and ask why she says that. And she replies, "North is the direction in front of you, yeah?" I'm still not entirely sure about the origins of that logic. We were 16 at the time and we went to go and do the deed. I realized I didn't have any protection and then she told me she didn't need it because I trust my body not to get pregnant. I asked her what she was talking about and she told me it takes conscious effort to become pregnant, and if she didn't want to be, she'd never conceive. How's she doing these days? 10 kids and living in a trailer? In my defense, this story was back in 2004. I found it charming and endearing that this guy did funny voices, made funny idiosyncratic jokes, and occasionally called me Milady. Then I saw Anchorman. Oh my god. He was literally doing a 24/7 Ron Burgundy impression, eclipsing his entire personality. I'm not sure that I ever really met the real him. Ah, the old imitate a fictional character because you have no real personality of your own trick. 0% of the time, it works every time. Why do people keep going to knife point? It sounds like people keep getting held up there. When we got into a legit argument over how many years there are in a decade. Baby, if you're reading this, there are only 10 years in a decade, not 12. That the past was black and white. She was dead serious. My mum used to come up with weird, deep answers to questions like this, which confused 5-year-old me a whole lot. When we were watching some documentary film with 1930s footage, I asked her, why was the world all grey back then? Her answer? Because the world was covered with the smoke of war. My ex of 4 years, when she considered it not cheating to do the deed with a woman because there's no eggplant on her. Girl, it's still cheating. I knew someone in high school who told a story about how once she was really nervous about getting pregnant. She wasn't, but when she finished her story, the teacher asked if she checked for transmissibles. Her reply was, "Oh, I'm on the pill." A girl I dated for 5 years thought Al-Qaeda was a lone dude named Al, and I convinced the same girl that Whoopi Goldberg was married to Gerard Depardieu, as in her full name is Whoopi Doopy Doo. I told her a story about my childhood. 2 weeks later, she told it to me, but this time it was her childhood, apparently. She tried to argue that we could get to the moon easier if we just built a spaceship that could go underwater, and flew it through the ocean to the moon during the daytime rather than straight up. My God, someone get NASA on the phone. When she told me that babies could only happen if there was love, and the only way to get purgant from the unspeakable act was if you really loved the offender. He shot himself in the leg twice while cleaning his weapon. The same weapon, 2 weeks apart. First, he got himself in the calf, and then he took out his kneecap the second time. Same leg. Took months of surgeries to fix it. We were at a restaurant and she saw a picture of a buffalo and said, "I want to eat that pig." I was dying laughing. Probably one of the funniest people I've dated, but definitely wasn't too sharp. My ex thought that whenever I missed his call, the phone would still be ringing after it went to voicemail. I got at least 3 voicemails a week that consisted of silence and the odd, annoyed, impatient sigh. I showed my wife this thread and she reminded me that I used to think that yeast infections were a result of eating too much bread. Yeah. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. We were laying out under the stars and he asked why some were brighter and others dimmer. I told him that there were different sizes, brightnesses, and distances away. Confused silence. You mean they're not stuck up there? I'm lying there thinking that this can't be true. But oh, yes, it was. Upon further questioning, I found that he believed the night sky was a big dark blanket-like thing with stars stuck on it. The fact that our sun was a star also blew his mind, and just like our sun, other stars could have planets? Well, that was too much. I was crushed. I almost broke up with him there and then. But he was very earnest and wanted me to teach him, so I tried. 2 years and a whole lot of stupid later, we broke up. Okay, to expand. He worked with kids with special needs and did a really good job at that. He was well-meaning, pretty generally. He wanted to become the world's leading expert in autism. Fine, good for you. So I brought him along to my university library where he spent a day copying a textbook on autism line by line. I asked him how it was going and he said, "Great." Then he and I had a conversation where I told him that to be a world expert on it, it would take more than reading and copying books. It would involve research or being really involved in the field and gaining a formal education in it. After that one day in the library, he never went back. I didn't say he couldn't, he just lost interest. He did that a lot. He'd get super stoked on one subject, and the next day it would just be over. Forgotten. This happened with poker after he watched the movie Rounders. He lived with a bunch of guys. They all didn't like him, but he was completely oblivious to that fact. They asked me a lot why I was with him. Anyway, he set up a poker night immediately and then lost all of his money to him. He was already super poor, so he lost about $100, and I forbade him from getting loans to gamble more. Again, the next day, it was gone from his head. Same thing with free mountain climbing after we watched the Mission Impossible movie, where Tom Cruise scaled a rock face with no ropes. I told him he should try free skydiving instead. I was getting pretty sick of his crap by this point. He laughed and it was gone from his mind again. His big dream, and one that actually lasted the longest, was that he wanted to be a mortgage broker. His dad was one and was really successful. He just couldn't do the math though. He had to take a course and I tried to teach him the formulas, but he just couldn't do it. We were running through problems and then he turned to me with an exasperated look on his face. Why do the numbers keep changing? As in, why would the numbers change in a certain formula from one problem to another? This almost tied for the most stupid experience, the big blanket in the sky, but not knowing about space and the sun and general knowledge of how the Earth is situated in terms of our solar system just seemed a little more profoundly deficient to me. For all those asking, he did not have a sweet hog. He was not especially attractive. He was sweet and well-meaning sometimes, when he wanted to be, but he got more and more nasty and insecure as time went on. He controlled my every move by the end, and as I had low self-confidence, I felt like it was my fault, and that by being better, he would eventually treat me better. It did not work out that way. Things were going towards physical bullying, and I left. He stalked me a little bit afterwards. Through a natural move due to school, I took the opportunity to lay low, and he left me alone, thankfully. It ended 15 years ago, and since then I've married and am very happy with his polar opposite, an extremely intelligent man with a sweet hog. Well, I'm glad that you got away from dummy and eventually met your well-endowed smarty pants man, author. I don't know how you take steps to fix the mental issues with your ex better than you were already trying to do. Was there any hope for him? Ah, well. She thought Scotland was its own island, as in separated by water. We live 30 minutes from the border of Scotland. Okay, to answer some of your questions, we live on the east coast of England, and some guy thought it was from someone outside of Europe. We've both lived in England our entire lives, which makes this even more shameful. When she tried to convince me that the Pacific Ocean was fresh water. He insisted that women cannot be doctors, only nurses, and vice versa. He said that the two are the exact same thing except one is male and one is female. He was in his early 20s. When she told me she had never been to France, I knew for a fact she went to Disneyland Paris every year. Paris isn't in France, she insisted. We live in the UK, not USA, or somewhere else. You can literally drive onto a train which takes you to France from our country. She told me her most common password was very secure because it was just a bunch of random numbers. The fact that those same numbers were also her social security number didn't seem to concern her. We were texting back and forth, and she said she was obsessed with Bon Jovi. And she spelt obsessed like upset but with an S before the T. I realized it was a typo and asked why she was upset with Bon Jovi, and she said, "No, I love him. I'm obsessed with him." Watching a wildlife documentary, and my girlfriend asked me if bears laid eggs. We both live in the UK, and just this morning she messaged me asking if Theresa May was the Prime Minister. This was one of her more sensible questions, but really, she should know this. He thought the Nation of Islam was a place. When I explained to him that this was not the case, he responded with, agree to disagree. Oh wow, Halloween is on Friday the 13th this year. No, it's not. Is that an albino duck? That's a dove. When I told her that not every country celebrates 4th of July, or Thanksgiving. Luckily, she left me for a smackhead named Brad and told everyone that I finish quickly in the bedroom. When she thought that flashing red lights on the road, as in traffic lights blinking red, meant that you were entering a different time zone instead of indicating a stop sign. The backstory is that this was in Northwest Virginia. We were in college. I was doing my student teaching and had told some of the kids that I would go to the fall play. But I'd broken my right ankle, so she drove us. She dropped this knowledge on me on the way to the play. I was dumbfounded. Mine must be pretty dumb. I asked her out and she said yes. She was out for a run one day, and when she came back, she said an animal charged at her. So she cut her run short. I asked her what it looked like, and she said, like a cow, but brown. It was a cow. Oh, that's a chocolate milk cow. The black and white cows turn all black when they're out of milk and slowly get white patches as they fill back up. When he told me, quite seriously, about how people with enough willpower can survive by photosynthesis. He called lingerie linguine, as in the pasta. I asked him about the class he was taking at community college. Oh, it's gonna be okay, better than last year. I failed it twice. Oh wow, must be a hard class. What's it about? Learning strategies. He failed a class about how to learn. Twice! He was getting his license renewed and they asked him if he wanted to be an organ donor. He said no way. When I asked why, he told me it was because he didn't want the government to come knocking for any of his organs when he still needed them. He really thought that becoming an organ donor meant that at any time, his organs could be taken. I mean, this man has seen the very serious and completely factual Monty Python documentary, The Meaning of Life, and taken one of its biggest lessons to heart. Bless. Driving down the road and the moon is visible during the day. She asks, "How is the moon out at the same time as the sun?" Sometimes that happens, it's not uncommon. "No, they're the same thing, so how come I can see both at the same time?" The sun and the moon are two different things. You're not serious, right? "Yeah, not everyone went to college like you, schoolboy. You learned this in like the 2nd grade." This woman was in her early 30s. My girlfriend at the time genuinely believed that it was the Headless Horseman that ran through Lexington and Concord shouting, "The British are coming, the British are coming." Boyfriend took me to a fancy restaurant and we ordered wine. When the waiter came back, he gave my boyfriend the cork to sniff. My boyfriend grabbed it, sucked on it, and licked it like a lollipop, all excited while the waiter looked uncomfortable, poured our glasses, and slunk away. When she said her dad told her the giant wind farms in Central California were to cool things down, and she believed him. I asked, "This happened when you were a kid, right?" "No, last year." While making Kool-Aid, "How much sugar does it need?" "It should say on the package." "Just tell me." "1 cup." "Okay, well there's only 1/3 of a cup here. Where's the whole cup?" "I don't know, just use the 1/3 cup then." How many scoops do I do then?" "It's 1/3 of a cup." "I don't know fractions, just tell me." "I'm not gonna tell you, figure it out, it's 1/3 of a cup. How many do you think it would be?" "I don't know, Jonathan, just tell me." 3. That girl was 20 years old at the time, and I'll never forget that experience. When he joined the Klan while dating me, I'm not white. He decided that he didn't want to go number 2 while staying with me in student halls, so he just didn't do it for 10 days and seriously messed up his digestive system. To clarify, I was living in student halls which were nothing more than bedrooms, bathrooms, and kitchens. It was a half-hour walk away from the university itself. His excuse was that he has anxiety about doing that in places he's not familiar with, or around a lot of people he didn't know at the time, as it was quite near the beginning of our relationship. She threw a butter knife at a light bulb in a crowded restaurant because she didn't like that it was flickering. What's the worst thing you've seen or heard in a game of truth or dare? I got dared to use a zip line that nobody had touched in decades. So we climbed up a mountain while wasted in the middle of the night and found that my friend was not bullcrapping and that it actually did exist. We used our zip on it and sailed over a 1,500-foot drop. And then the thought occurred to me that I had no way of getting back, and I had not even brought a flashlight with me and had absolutely no knowledge of the part of the mountain I was zipping to. So I basically stood in place for 7 hours or so. I don't know if that was the worst, but it was definitely the most stupid, considering that the whole point of the game was to get with some girls who were no longer in a partying mood after I disappeared into the night. When I was about 15 years old, my old high school soccer team had a co-ed spaghetti dinner that turned into a co-ed sleepover. Maybe about 6 guys and 5 girls. We ended up taking a bottle of really cheap Mr. Boston vodka from this kid's parents, and all of us began drinking much faster than 15-year-olds should. I was beginning to feel pretty nauseous, but was determined to stay in the game of truth or dare that we'd started. I was then dared to kiss the bare butt cheeks of one of the more crude chicks on the girls' team. As I pressed my lips to her cheek, she thought it would be hilarious to grab the back of my head and let rip right in my face. The heat and smell were too much for my stomach to bear, and as I pulled away, I blew chunks all over her back and butt. One of my mates said he had his Johnson pierced and nobody believed him, as he'd sometimes exaggerate or make up stories. To prove it, he put a straw through the piercing, and then another of my mates was dared to drink his drink through the straw. It was hilarious and weird, and both parties regretted it immediately. I was playing Truth or Dare with a few friends, my best friend and my best friend's wife. When they were married, they were both virgins by choice, from a traditional household. We're having fun and it comes to my turn, and I ask my best friend's wife, Truth or Dare, and she answers, Truth. My friend and I would always joke about our significant others despising the act of doing it in the butt and being disgusted by it. So I asked the joke, have you ever done it in the butt? She says, yes. Her husband turns bright red and says, no, we haven't, and the two leave shortly after. Turns out she was a traditional virgin, but had lost her, rear virginity back in high school. We didn't really talk after that. Church values. You see, at that point, just doing the deed the usual way feels less sinful and dirty, to be honest. Not that there's anything wrong with doing it in the butt if you're into that. I just think that surely your divine being can't think that your workaround was any better than what you were trying to avoid. Same motions, same intent, same goal, for him at least, and just more number 2. Ugh. I'm a little late here, but my friend answered a truth and told everyone that he has 2 buttholes. Long story short, I've seen it, and that guy has 'em. And what I learned later from the internet is that there are many people with 2 buttholes. Color me surprised. Really drunk at a house party in high school. This hot girl named Jennifer took a truth. So the question was what her worst experience in bed had been. Suffice to say that the answer devolved into a cryfest about some legitimately traumatic stuff. After that, we didn't play the game very much anymore. When I was 17, I worked as a summer camp counselor. The week of our orientation, before the campers arrived, all the counselors were down by the lake and we started a game of truth or dare. Everyone was pretty normal except for this quiet girl that was a Disney freak. Everything Disney. Pajamas, sleeping bag, hair ties, t-shirts, all Disney, all the time. Being 17-year-olds in the woods, our truths and dares got pretty raunchy pretty quickly. After finishing my dare, I turned to her and asked, truth or dare? Truth was the reply. Okay. Have you ever done the deed? I asked. Yes, but only with one person. The answer then went a little too dark for YouTube. But suffice to say, we probably should have called the cops about what we heard. Game fricking over. For the people asking for a follow-up, many of the counselors and naturalists spoke with her that night and the next morning. Her father had been jailed a few years ago prior to her telling us. One dare was to bake cookies whilst in the buck, but then we were out of sugar, so a follow-up dare required a second person going to the neighbor's door in their underwear to ask for a cup of sugar. It worked and the cookies were delicious. The grad student neighbors didn't even bat an eye. In high school, a group of friends were playing truth or dare drunk after a party at my house. One of my friends had a crush on a girl and was trying hard to get with her. So when it was her turn to ask him, he suavely stated, dare. She told him to put one of the lights adorning the nearby Christmas tree into his wee-wee hole. He did, she was disgusted, and ended up loudly hooking up with another friend in an adjacent room, like soul-crushingly loud, while he stayed on the couch nursing his burnt meatus. 'Tis the season, I guess. One time I was dared to kiss this girl and I passed because I was in a long-going relationship with a girl I really love, of 3 years, so I did the following dare instead. I poured really hard rum onto my hand, lit it, and I had to keep it lit for as long as I could. Once it got too hot to handle, I had to put it out. Part of the dare was to put it out with the watermelon next to us. So I proceeded to punch it open with my flaming fist and stick my hand in it for 3 long, annoyingly sticky hours. I mean, you punched a hole in a watermelon with fire for love. That's amazingly badass. I was at a truth or dare party in college. Everyone pays $5 to get in and gets the same allotment of Monopoly money. You bet people to do things and accept bets, and whoever has the most at the end of the night gets to keep the door money. Greatest party ever. I just dared girls to make out with me all night, until I ran out of money, so I had to accept a couple of dares. Someone dared this other guy to eat a zebra cake off my butt, and dared me to drop trow and allow him to. So I figured, I'm not eating it, no big deal. It wasn't that terrible, but it did get my butt all sticky. I also felt like I couldn't really complain because of what the other guy had to do. At age 18, while at a friend's house digging around looking for a lighter, he finds an adult toy in his single dad's bedroom. It was one of those hot pink sparkly male member toys with the rabbit thing on it. Something that didn't really seem like a guy toy, and it was in the spare nightstand, so we assumed maybe an old girlfriend's or something. Fast forward a few weeks later, his dad was out of town and there were a few of us over playing truth or dare, and I dared him to do something with his dad's toy. At first, his face turned 10 shades of red, embarrassed in front of everyone else, but then he manned up, grabbed it with a Ziploc bag worn like a glove, and rubbed some sliced habanero peppers all over it. This was a Friday night and his dad was supposed to be back Saturday. Saturday night rolls around and he and our other friend and myself are all in his house quietly as we had been drinking and had snuck in. This was about 8 p.m.-ish. As the other friend and I stood in the driveway, we heard the most god-awful, blood-curdling scream, the kind of scream that sounds like someone is being murdered. We dashed in just in time to meet our friend in the hallway as he sprinted into his dad's room. His mum, as in his father's ex-wife, is on the floor butt naked, curled up in a ball screaming her head off. Apparently, his mum and dad had been screwing around behind the family's back. A hospital trip followed, and after spending the night in the ER, not knowing what the frick happened, they ended up coming out in the open, getting back together and then remarried. That was 12 years ago and they're still together. For their wedding present, I gave them a jar of habaneros that they still don't understand to this day. Thank you, Ryan. If you're ever out there, your mum's burning bush has become mildly famous on Reddit and YouTube. I never knew the internet liked a good, fiery love story. Your friend's cruel actions brought his parents back together. That's absolutely amazing. Parent Trap 2, Habanero Boogaloo. Well, all's well that ends well, I suppose. My God, I cannot imagine getting a high Scoville score pepper on one's private parts. I've repeatedly done it to my eyes before, but never downstairs. I do not envy your mother. A girl at a party I once went to got dared to sit on a small lava lamp. As in, sit on it, if you get what I mean. Anyway, this thing was on and hot. The poor girl sat for 2 seconds and jumped right back up. Turned out she gave herself burns on the inside of her lady parts. My friends and I dared a kid to snort a bit of very, very hot sauce. He snorted it like a champ and then spent the rest of the night with blood pouring from his face. 7th grade. What were we thinking? It wasn't really a dare, but a drunken friend said he'd show us how much of a man he was. In quick succession, he chugged about 250 mils of Jack Daniels, snorted a line of salt and then poured vinegar into one eye and squeezed a lemon in the other. Everyone laughed at him because he had to run to the bathroom crying to wash his eyes. I saw a prolapsed butthole as proof for a truth that no one would believe. It was not a pretty flower. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. It's not that bad comparatively, but it was still unpleasant. In 4th grade, we played Truth or Dare at my birthday party. It was all guys, which made it kinda weird. One friend dared another friend to get into the buck, which was really weird. So my pal begins a striptease as we all beg him to stop. He got down to his stained briefs, this guy didn't let his wee-wee drain all the way I guess, and was just beginning to lower them when we heard a scream. My 7-year-old sister had just walked into the room to see a scrawny, self-proclaimed street-rapping gangster/meteorologist busting out his hog. He dove into his sleeping bag and didn't talk to anyone for the rest of the night. We decided video games were a lot more fun and immediately ended the game. My friend denied anything had ever happened the next day. This guy was obsessed with weather in elementary school, all he ever talked about. He was a white kid who moved to our very white city from a very diverse, low-income city, so he talked like a thug while going on about cold fronts. He did end up becoming a meteorologist though, so hey, good for him. I got really drunk in a game with some workmates, and I had to pull out my ball bag and touch it against another guy's. Probably pretty tame compared to the rest of this video though. Went to an adult-themed elf party once for Christmas. Good mix of a crowd until we all got absolutely off our heads. Some guy got dared to be blindfolded and have a down-under kiss from some random girl. A guy at the party who'd always denied being gay decided it would be funny for him to do this particular act. That's how my friends Tom and Chad met and later got married. We were on our way to Hershey's Park for the 8th grade class trip. All the cool kids sat in the back of the bus. Somehow I got a seat back there too. It began as a silly middle school game of Truth or Dare, until this girl was dared to go south of the border on some guy for 2 minutes, and then a few turns later, she was dared to do it again to a different guy. I was an innocent cream puff Casper milquetoast, having never seen anything like this outside of my computer, and I was in shock. Not super risque, but it gave her the funniest nickname for the next 4 years in high school. Doubleheader. An entire room of girls had to rub A535 gel on their hoo-has. There was silence and then screams. I watched my friend take a crap in the park, and then we threw rocks at it. I miss being a teenager. One of the popular girls in my high school admitted to regularly making brown in her hand. She took truth and was asked to tell an embarrassing secret or something like that. She said that she was always embarrassed whenever there was a splashing sound in the toilet when she went number 2, so she'd always do it in her hand and then slide it quietly into the water. She went from being a popular girl to being the brown-handed girl pretty quick. A friend of mine back in high school was asked where the weirdest place he'd ever tickled his pickle was. His answer was a train, which, it's pretty weird, but we did ask. And then, for whatever reason, he didn't stop talking there, and he told us where he put the mess afterwards. When the train staff came through, he fricking ate it. Again, he just told us that last part without anyone even asking. Oh, and there it is. There is the winner of the Gagging Narrator Award. I mean, I'm thankful you didn't just wipe it out on the upholstery, but my god, next time can you just not do that particular deed at all, so there's no need for any grisly choice like that to be made? Oh! Okay, so this is a long story, but I promise the payoff is there. First college party. Commence after party truth or dare with about 8 people. 3 a.m. rolls around and we're down to 6 people, but things start getting a little raunchy. A kiss here, a flash there, take off an article of clothing, all in good fun. 3:30 rolls around and damn, I still remember the time. This really cute girl who I was crushing on since high school asked me and I answered truth, because by this time I was down to my boxers, and I didn't really feel like sitting with my eggplant out. Anyway, she asks me some stupid question, I forget what it was exactly, along the lines of what's the craziest place you've done the deed. I was a virgin at the time, so my answer naturally was a lie. However, it was a boring one. I said the living room at my parents' house. Everyone started booing me, saying that the answer wasn't worth a turn, and told the girl to go again. I got really embarrassed because not only was it a giant lie, but a giant lie that was apparently too prudish. For some reason, let's call it booze and green herb, I agreed to go again. Inside, I was having a panic attack and wanted to cry. Yes, men have feelings too. So to avoid a repeat of that question, I went with dare. Screw it, I thought. I'm decently hung, so I'd rather have it out than have people find out that I'd never put it in anything. I was 18. In my defense, losing your virginity was everything back then. So she dares me to go south of the border on her. This is literally every guy's dream, right? The girl you want more than anything but thought you couldn't have just asks you to give her a down-under kiss. So I obliged, whole fricking heartedly. And it went all downhill from there, folks. As soon as it sunk in what she'd asked for, things got real stiff down there. And I was wearing those peekaboo boxers, so guess who showed his face without me noticing? And guess whose face began drooling? So yeah. Pre-splooge is a real thing, is something I learned that night. So here I am sitting across from the hottest girl who's ever asked me to just do some stuff with her, with my Mr. out, oozing, throbbing, and leaking all over my boxers, surrounded by 3 other girls and another guy as well as some random party stragglers who are just watching this all unfold. It gets pretty bad. I notice what's going on, but I don't think much of it because she's already taken her undies off. So all she does is hike up her skirt and spread them wide. Holy crap, I'd never done this before. The most I'd ever done with a girl was a kiss at that point. I should preface this by saying I get all gassy when I'm nervous. Some of you may know where this is going, but I guarantee you fricking don't. So now she's lying like this on the floor and I need to make a move, so I do what any girl-loving guy would do in the most awkward way possible. I shifted down to all fours and crawled toward her like a frickin' tiger or something. I put my face in the correct area, but my hands aren't touching her or anything. Instead, I'm on all fours like I'm a puppy sniffing at her. After a few seconds, the position gets horribly uncomfortable and I shift my weight in such a way that my butt is now sticking up and my knees are underneath my body. What happens next is the single worst 30 seconds of my life, followed by years of shame. She begins moaning and tells me to take off my boxers. I quickly oblige, but I can only get them half off in this position without stopping what I'm doing. So I'm now mooning 3 chicks and a guy that are sitting behind me with my hairy crevice perfectly on display about 2 feet from their faces. The woman that I'm doing this to starts moaning more and saying she's about to get there. Anxiety gets the better of me and I get super nervous. Did I mention I get gassy when I'm nervous? And did I mention that alcohol also gives me horrible indigestion? The more things heat up, the more I'm now focusing on what's about to be the biggest toot of my life. She begins to go into her state of euphoria, and I can feel it from her downstairs and her other muscles tensing up. I get so excited but simultaneously relieved that I can stop and excuse myself to go to the bathroom and let one out. Except I got relieved too soon. The blast was explosive, but the real problem was that I hadn't done number 2 all day. So the net result was this girl moaning, screaming, and having the time of her life while I was simultaneously taking a projectile crap on 4 people behind me. The smell. Oh God, the smell. I didn't want to turn around, but I had to before the other girl was even done with arriving. They were fricking coated. One of the girls got it worse than everyone else. Her face looked like it was dipped in a bucket of Nutella. Chunky, watery Nutella. The guy got it bad too, and they all got it in their hair, their mouths. Oh God. So now this was all happening in several seconds. So when the girl finally opens her eyes, all she sees is my gaping butthole with bits of number 2 sticking out of it. I turn around to look at the damage, and me on all fours, and the other people soaked in it, starting to scream. She screamed, I screamed, and the guy began hitting me, covering me in my own number 2 that was falling off his face and neck, except several seconds after he started hitting me, he began blowing chunks. His hands slipped on the upchuck and he collapsed on top of me. 2 undressed guys on top of each other, coated in splooge, chunks, and explosive number 2, surrounded by hot chicks, most of whom are also covered in number 2. In short, the story has haunted me for 5 years. Epilogue, I actually dated this girl for 2 years afterwards, and the chick who got coated in my crap the worst is now my best friend. The guy I actually never saw again. He left that night. I saw the other 2 girls from time to time, but we never made eye contact. For some reason, people started calling me Butt Candy at parties after that. The nickname stuck around at parties until I moved cities a year ago. Up until now, the narrator has never had a story that he couldn't finish without laughing, so well done to that author. Whether your tale is real or fictional, I salute you. My God. What did you do at work that made you realize, well, I'm getting fired, aren't I? I worked for a small computer company, doing a couple of million a year in sales. One of my tasks was to update price listings and have those changes reflect on our vendors' websites. I put 1 less 0 on one computer model and ended up costing our company $30,000 in about 1 day. Someone had noticed the error and bought a crap ton of computers. Even though there was a Q&A process to catch these things after me, I knew that I was getting fired. In short, I got fired. I should say that my boss was actually pretty cool about it, but they had to put the blame on someone. He told me I could still use them as a reference and that I could label the position as a short-term contract. I'm a police dispatcher, and one time at work I was working the desk and Toys for Tots workers came in. My boss joked that I should ID them to make sure they weren't thieves. We laughed and the gentleman took the 10 trash bags full of toys and left. Later that night, a man called and asked when he could pick up the toys. After telling him that 2 guys already picked the toys up, he confirmed to me that we had most likely been robbed. He asked if I'd ID'd them, and I said no. He spoke to my boss, and my boss then informed me that we would probably be on the news since a police station was robbed, which was ironic, and he flipped out on me. It turns out it was actually an off-duty cop calling to play a prank on me. I worked at an automotive parts manufacturing factory while going to art college, and part of my job was boxing up parts and attaching a tag onto the box with thin wire. But for every box I completed, one every couple of hours, I sculpted a little animal out of the wire with needle nose pliers. I gave the little sculptures, bears, rabbits, whatever, to random employees, which they left on their workstation. One day, as I was making one of the little sculptures, I looked over my right shoulder to see my supervisor standing directly behind me, just watching me with a clipboard. I paused, looked her dead in the eye, held out the sculpture, and said, "Want a bear?" She fired me on the spot. I'm now an animator at Disney. I hope that before asking your fateful question, you maintained eye contact with your supervisor for at least 5 seconds, with an equal amount of time after your question and before she said, "You're fired." Because that takes this from funny to like NBC comedy script level. Good job on moving up and creating different, more complicated bears for the silver screen. I was a legal secretary. My boss was excited about our new big money case with a new big money client. We'll call them Plaintiff Smith. Boss had 3 attorneys write a 6-page letter to our client outlining exactly how we're going to cream Defendant Jones. The letter included possible counterattacks and legal citations and basically our entire strategy. Meanwhile, I was poring over documents we had received regarding Defendant Jones. I was asked to mail the strategy letter to our client, Plaintiff Smith. No biggie, just put it in an envelope, right? I knew he lived out on Maple Drive, so I pulled his address from some papers on my desk and I mailed that sucker out. Next day, I'm poring over those Defendant Jones documents again, and my blood ran cold. No one had told me that Jones and Smith were next-door neighbors. The address I'd pulled was Jones's. I'd mailed our entire strategy to the opposing side. I immediately called their local post office and used my lunch break to drive there for the next 2 days. People at my office knew my mistake. I think I wasn't fired immediately because there was some chance I might fix it. Everyone avoided me or gave me tight-lipped smiles. Miraculously, the postmaster finally located the letter. The carrier had it in her bag on the 3rd day and brought it back to the post office where I was waiting. I gave the postmaster a $25 gift card and my tearful gratitude. My boss, who'd avoided me, finally broke the silence and said, "I cannot believe you fricking found that letter." It became a crazy story around the office, and I was not fired. I worked at a movie theater in high school. I'm blind in one eye and used to be sensitive about it. I got into an argument with a coworker at the theater, but didn't really think anything of it. Later on, I was going down the hall to get more ice and passed him as he was tearing tickets for customers. He muttered, "Cyclops," as I passed, just loud enough for me to hear. So I immediately turned around and punched him in the face in front of his line of customers. I never saw managers run so fast. Hey, you know those little toys for kids? The little pieces where you shoot off bits of potato? Well, I had the bright idea to shoot off a potato shooter in the parking lot of my company. I fired a few rounds across the road when the maintenance manager came running out, screaming at me. I then realized I was firing a weapon on company property. It doesn't matter that it's potatoes and right guard, it's still a projectile. My fellow supervisors who were watching all disappeared. I went back to my desk to await my manager. All I got was a "I trust this will not happen again" email. I still work for the company and it occasionally gets brought up on my work anniversary. I was working at Cozy, a sandwich, soup and salad place, and had asked to leave early the previous day since my uncle had died. I went back to work and was still in a state of shock and I couldn't check my baggage at the door. I had this horrible lady change her order 4 times during the lunch rush when I had a line out the door. I couldn't take it anymore and told her to either order or get the frick out of my line. My manager heard me. Before he could say anything, I took my apron and hat off, handed it to him and grabbed my stuff and left. I use ADIUM to manage my instant messages while I'm at work. I'm a developer. I was speaking to a project manager at a new job. I'd been there for maybe a month. She was asking me to do some tedious work that was completely unnecessary because they promised it to a client. While frustrated, I tabbed over to my girlfriend's IM to complain about how frustrated I was that they were making us do all this work for basically nothing. Unfortunately, I didn't tab over, and I sent the IM to the project manager. My heart sunk into my stomach. I saw the little icon that showed she was typing and was like, "Oh crap, how do I cover this up before she responds?" I reread the comment and noticed I used a lot of pronouns, so when she responded, she thought I was talking to her about the client. Dear Lord, I thought I'd ruined my awesome new job right after it started. In high school, I worked at an AM radio station in my small town on Sunday mornings. I was the only person there from 6 a.m. to noon. It was mostly reading the weather and playing pre-taped programs. At one point, I play a live broadcast of a Catholic mass going on. During that time, I would crawl into a ball in the break room and doze off, hungover from the night before. One Sunday I woke up to, "God damn it, Tim, you can't sleep on the job." And I sit up and see the boss who runs the station standing over me with a frown. "But I wasn't sleeping," I say. Just when I think he might buy it, he says, "You have an alarm clock next to you." Yeah, I brought an alarm clock that I'd set so I didn't oversleep. Hard to explain that one. I thought I was screwed, but somehow he didn't fire me. I worked there for another month and then I left for college. I work in a furniture store, mainly in the warehouse. We sell expensive crap. Like the cheapest lamp you'll find is $100, and that's because it's damaged slightly. We'd received a shipment of a very expensive set, all for a model home that we were staging. I had a china cabinet, still boxed, on our forklift. It was set on a pallet upright on its side, so that was very tall and not very wide. I was bringing it into the warehouse and being super careful. Well, we have a sunken manhole right in front of the warehouse garage floor. The front right wheel of the forklift went right into the dip, and I watched that 350-pound box of wood and glass teeter, rock, and fall flat on the ground. It made a solid thunk, and I knew it was all over. It turned out to not have a sad ending. The lady in charge of damages knew it was an accident and ordered a new one right away, no worries or anything. But when we received the new piece, my manager wouldn't let me near it. Look, I know that you knew about the danger of the manhole and all, but surely it's mostly on your boss for knowing that this problem was an ongoing thing and not taking steps to fix it, because they sure as all heck would have had trouble firing you for that kind of incident. I'm a medical equipment repair technician. One night I was working on an exam light that was hanging from the ceiling in an operating room. I had a bit of it apart and was inspecting the connection between the big light head and the arm that it was suspended from when a clip popped out. The light head dropped to the floor. The arm is spring-loaded and it shot up and shattered the ceiling and 5 or 6 lights, showering the operating table, anesthesia cart, and myself in ceiling tile, plastic, and glass. At first, I was in shock, and what just happened didn't register in my brain. I reached down to pick up the light's head, which is about 3 inches across, and grabbed the arm with my other hand. While trying to put them back together, I realized I'm coating everything in blood. The operations staff came running in and just saw me surrounded by destruction and covered in my own blood. Fortunately, the charge nurse had a sense of humor. I worked at a ticket booth for a water park in high school as a summer job. It was 2010, and so a lot of the people I was working with were adults with families and whatnot, but we were all very close because it's retail, and thus gives you all a common enemy. Anyway, with school starting back up again, I'd put in my 2 weeks' notice. It was a summer job, so I actually had to give my end date on the first day, but we still had to submit a notice. Our company was extremely paranoid about cash. We didn't have any money or cards on us at any time while working, and you couldn't leave your work area at all once you were given money unless you checked your till back in to your supervisor, including every bathroom break. There were cameras all over the booth, and you had to explicitly count any money on the table, separated, so that it would show up on camera. All money was counted randomly throughout your shift twice a day and then again at the end. If you had a variance of over $20, it was considered a Class 3 violation and you were immediately fired. Tickets for the water park were about $60 a person, so one screw-up was essentially all you got in ticketing. Anyway, a woman I was working with, probably about 45, was checking her till in at the same time as me. We talked a lot during downtime. I knew she had 3 kids and was recently divorced. She kept full custody of the kids, but she was essentially a housewife before that. Her husband was very well off, and though with some nice support payments she could keep afloat, she had to take the job to be able to give her kids nice things. She was frustrated at her husband always getting to be the hero who would come in to take them on vacation and didn't have to discipline them and who had the money to buy them new game systems and the clothes that her daughter wanted and whatnot. She was stressed and low on sleep all the time. She was working other jobs too. Anyway, we were tilling out and then I realized she's taking a long time. We put our money through a scanner and there's only one, so I was waiting for her to finish. And I realized she's running everything through multiple times. So I ask what's going on. And I realize her eyes are getting really watery and she whispers that she's off by $36. Now, we really can't make a fuss because while the cameras don't do audio, there are still supervisors around. So I, in a split-second decision, shuffled some paperwork around and slipped the money to her till and told her to just try again. I figured that I was signing off my own death certificate. I got fired on the spot when they checked me out after. They took my gate keys and my ID card, a security officer was called and he escorted me to the break room to get my stuff, and then to my car, where they took my parking pass and drove behind me in their golf cart until I was out of the gates. I wasn't allowed to see anyone or say goodbye, so there was no real closure with me and that woman. She did call me a couple of days later to say thank you and how much it meant and whatnot, and invited me over for dinner with her family. But I was getting ready to go back to school for a couple of days and said no thanks. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Worked at Taco Bell. As a background, people generally consider me very mild-tempered and kind. One night was particularly stressful. It wasn't unusual for us to kind of beat on the touchscreens a bit, but I got mad and I punched one. Mind you, it wasn't a full-blown oh my god punch, it was more like if your buddy made fun of you and you kind of annoyingly punched his shoulder. The screen shattered and then the touchscreen started ringing up hundreds of, coincidentally, fruit punches. The girl working next to me saw the screen shatter and saw my hand bleeding and looked at me like she thought I'd just started a rampage and was about to go after her. I got fired 3 times that night. Each manager, the store, the district, and regional, fired me, yelled at me, then calmed down, and said that since I'd been a good worker, they'd let me stay if I paid for it. I paid for it. It took a couple of paychecks to replace the touchscreen computer in 2002. I was working for a faith-based radio station. I was supposed to hook up the ISDN for a live broadcast. I shut my eyes, just for a minute, and woke up half an hour into the hour-long broadcast. I got the ISDN to connect, but no audio was playing. I yelled some things like, "Eggplant sucker, goddammit," and then I figured out that the ISDN was hooked up to an A-B switch. The B side was the microphone in front of my face. A couple of old ladies called in after the broadcast saying, "I didn't hear the church for a half hour, and then I heard a man's voice, I think it was you, and then it came on." "Oh, don't worry, ma'am, it won't be a problem going forward, I assure you." I told them I'd switched my medication and passed out. Which is sort of true. That and I was up all night drinking in a faraway town and didn't get any sleep the night before. I left a voicemail for my boss and never went back or worked in a radio again. It just wasn't for me. In short, I said wang sucker on live Christian radio working as an engineer. I quit and I regret nothing. Honestly, the narrator doesn't think they would have fired you, or at least they shouldn't have. Given that you hear about male pastors getting away with mega scandals, what's an accidental exclamation of member sucking between friends? But in all seriousness, I don't think they would have. Depending on the faith, these people can actually be quite forgiving. Threw a staple gun onto the counter. It bounced up and smashed a hole through the monitor at my workstation. I was fired the next day. I was young and I had just got my full-time job at an awesome company. It was a small .com startup, and those of us in customer support, which was about 5 people, had a running gag with the NOC team, which was about 5 people. We called them the NOC bastards, and they called us pool boys, even though I was the first female on the customer support team. On a dare from my supervisor, Reed, not my real manager, I went into the company's alias list and set up nocbastards@company.com to go to the NOC alias, and poolboys@company.com to go to us. The system admin saw the file change and he saw who changed it. Third day of work, I got a stern talking to. I went white as I saw my dream job slipping away. He saw how freaked out I was getting and said, "Calm down, you're not going to get fired for this or anything," before proceeding to go further. He then called in my supervisor and gave him a real stern talking to as well. I ended up becoming friends with that system admin and spent 6 wild years at that company. Oh, my dad has a great one. He was a busboy at a restaurant and it was his first day on the job. The place was packed and he was rushing back with a ton of dishes. Somehow the tray to carry them fell and all of the dishes fell to the floor with a loud crash. Everyone looked over at my dad. My dad saw that there was one lone dish intact, picked it up, held it out at arm's length, then dropped it. It broke. Everyone in the restaurant applauded, and he was then fired. I was once chatting with a higher-up manager about how a lot of people were away on the holidays. She said she might leave early, but I was stuck pulling a couple of extra hours with all of the people out getting their stuff handled. As she was walking away, what I wanted to say was, "Yep, don't want to have anyone working harder at their job than they have to this time of year," or something like that. But what came out of my mouth was, "Yep, don't want to have to make you do your job." She was already around the corner by the time I got that far, so my brain made me stop talking. Then I realized what I'd just said. But it was too late, she was already gone. I heard about it quite a bit from my direct superior later, but nothing came of it. I worked phone technical support in the late 90s. We had an instant messenger program, but weren't supposed to use it. Only the managers contacted you on that. So a manager starts a large group conversation on a Friday, then immediately drops off. We continue chatting and having fun for a few minutes, but most of us drop out. About 10 of us kept going. After some time, someone invites a few of our Canadian counterparts to the conversation. We're joking back and forth about who has the better beer, how their weather is sunny, ours was rainy that day, among other things. In the spirit of fun, I post the lyrics to the Royal Canadian Kilted Yaxman song from Ren and Stimpy. It seems to be no big deal, conversation dies out within about 15 minutes and we eventually turn it off. I then get a dreaded manager instant message asking my name and group manager. Uh-oh. Within a few minutes, I'm called in by my manager and he takes me to another manager who runs the Canadian group. I was reported as making offensive and harassing comments. My manager asks me very solemnly, "What did you say?" I know I'm so fired at this point, so I just say, I quoted the lyrics to the Ren and Stimpy Royal Canadian Kilted Yaxman song. He snorts and almost does a spit take laughing, and then quickly recovers and says, "Okay, don't do it again. Instant messenger is only to be used for work purposes." The other manager just kind of rolls her eyes, tells me the Canadian team doesn't have a sense of humor, and reiterates not doing it again. And that was it. I got away with a slap on the wrist. I just started work in the field as a natural gas technician. I'm normally a model employee at every job I have, but this one started off a little shaky. My first day, while making a K-turn, I backed the company truck into a ditch and bottomed it out. My bosses had to drive out 45 minutes from the office to pull me out. They were obviously annoyed, but for some reason, they decided to keep me aboard. Strike one. The second day at my last house of the day, I managed to lock my keys in the truck. On-duty boss had to leave home, drive all the way to the office and get the spare keys and come unlock my door. Strike two. Third day, no incident. Fourth day, at my first house of the day, while bleeding the gas line inside the house, the gas ignites. Totally burns out the AC unit. This is it. I'm fired. There's no way I keep my job after this. Boss comes to the house, looks at it, looks at me and said, "Man, you screwed up." The next day I was told to stay home. And thus concluded the worst first week on the job I've ever heard of. The best part? Somehow I didn't lose my job, but instead went on to be the best tech they had. I worked there for over a year before moving on to do better things. I worked as a media buyer, and on my third day on the job, my boss asked me to find some information and update the huge spreadsheet he was working on for the client's annual plan. As I was about to update it, he opened the file to finish a few things and asked me to wait. Now, I'm the new girl wanting to show service. I decide to open a copy of the spreadsheet and update it there, so when he finishes, I know where it goes. He finishes, lets me know I can open the file. I just save the one that I've updated on top of his work. I basically made him lose an entire day of work. The year-round spreadsheet was ready, and the one I had was a rough draw. I really thought he was going to throw his monitor on my head. He changed colors and had to leave the office in order not to curse me out. I apologized the next day and so did he, and we agreed to always save versions from that day forward. Firefighters. What ways have you seen idiots literally make their lives go up in flames? In the city of Colorado Springs, the local news did a fluff piece about candle safety near Christmas. After they were done filming, the owner of the store that they were filming in took the crew out to breakfast. She didn't put out the candles and burned several shops to the ground. The film crew was there to film her breakdown when they realized what had caused the fire. I worked for a restoration company. A family cut a small tree down and tried to stuff it up their fireplace to burn it. The flute was so crammed with leaves that smoke started to fill the living room. They tried to pull the tree out and that's when it really caught fire. They tried to pull it out of the house and they got as far as the front door. All of them had second and third degree burns on their hands and arms, and the fire destroyed the front room and entryway of their house. The insurance company asked us if we thought it was a case of fraud, and we told them, "No, these people are just really stupid." A fairly common one, but the response was interesting. Early February, Western Pennsylvania. A guy's pipes freeze on the coldest day of the year, -8 degrees Fahrenheit. He tries to thaw them out with a propane torch, and sets the wall on fire, tries to put the fire out, and fails. Finally calls 911. Fire chief is half a block away and is on scene in under a minute. The basement is fully involved, main floor catching. The first engine arrives in under 5 minutes. Doors are blocked by fire, exterior attack only. I was on the attack line, spraying water into the second floor window. After 40 minutes, another firefighter comes to relieve me, but since I'd been getting back spray, I was frozen to the ground. He has to pull me loose. 2 hours later, we've knocked it down. The insurance adjuster shows up. The assistant chief explains what started the fire. The adjuster replies, "Yeah, we know. It's okay. We insure for stupid." Nobody got hurt, by the way. Family got a much nicer house out of the deal as well. A teenager was charcoal grilling in the attached garage during the winter. When he was done, he decided the best place to dispose of the hot coals was into a cardboard box in front of the corner of the garage closest to the house. Yeah, it went about as well as you can imagine. I don't understand what they mean by that last sentence. Paper and its relatives are famously fireproof. That's why we make all of our important documents out of it, surely. And it's also why the narrator has a trail of single-ply toilet paper circled around his fireplace and leading into the bedroom of his firstborn child. My dad was a firefighter. He once went to a house fire that was started by the old lady who lived there. She liked to burn candles, but didn't like the wax buildup that would form in the cavity, so she would soak up the liquid wax with a napkin. She was doing this when she accidentally brushed a wax-soaked napkin up against the flame. She panicked and threw the napkin into the trash, where all the other wax napkins were. As the trash can exploded into flames, she fled the house, but not before she went to her oxygen tanks and flooded the house with pure oxygen because she thought that it would smother the fire. Not a house fire, but really good. Late 1980s. Guy was driving an old beat-up Lincoln. He turned a corner to go up a steep hill, but the road department had recently ground the asphalt down in preparation to repave. A storm sewer manhole cover was sticking up about 4 inches. As he went over it and up the hill, the rear of his car dragged due to the pavement height difference, and the manhole ripped open his fuel tank and sparked off the gas. He described it as, "I heard a scraping sound, looked in the mirror, and there was a trail of fire chasing me up the hill like I was the roadrunner." He pulled into a gravel parking lot and tried to kick a brake in the trail before the fire got there, but it jumped the gap and hit the car. By the time we got there, it was up in flames. He actually thought it was kind of funny. The only real loss was his wife's purse with her license and credit cards. The car was insured and they got a nice payout for it. I am a firefighter, but this wasn't in my district. A guy was attempting to forge a sword in a burning barrel in an alley, based on something he'd watched on the History Channel. The embers from the, quote, forge lit up the building he lived in and destroyed 3 multi-story family residential buildings. This happened in the past fall. A family had a fairy house that was outside, right next to their wooden-sided house. The fairy house was made out of an old tree and had a bunch of decorations in it, including incense candles. One evening, they decided that they'd light the candles for the fairy, which then caught the tree on fire, which then extended into the house. Since it started on the outside, it ran up the side of the house first and got into the attic and second floor. The family was home, but in the first floor while this was happening. It wasn't until someone driving on the road saw the smoke and went to alert the family that they realized. Luckily, we were able to save the structure. There was a bit of damage to the roof, attic, and second floor, but the homeowners are rebuilding those areas now. In college, a girl in the dorms was making popcorn, which, not sure, but somehow caught fire in the microwave. She didn't want to get into trouble for it, so she grabbed the flaming bag of popcorn and threw it into the nearby trash can, then proceeded to cover the fire with paper towels to, quote, smother it. She actually thought it would work. It did not work. I came back exhausted after work to find the dorm building surrounded by fire trucks. Based on the stories of relatives, the answer is by allowing 10 years worth of dryer lint to accumulate inside the machine until it just bursts into flames. This was not an isolated case. Forgetting to close the bottom of your grill and then going overboard with lighter fluid. Oh yeah, a friend of mine in the 5th grade caught himself on fire with lighter fluid when the charcoal wasn't really starting. They used to sell extension arms that you could hook the lighter fluid can to, and he used one of those. But the fire ran up the dripping fluid into the can. No problem, he just walked over and set it down and released the holder, at which point the can tipped over. It was only about a quarter full, so only a little spilled out, but he went to tip it back up when it exploded right when his head was above it, and the burning lighter fluid covered his head. He was pretty smart for an 11-year-old. He remembered where the fire extinguisher was, ran over, pulled the pin, sprayed himself, but he still had bad burns all over his face and head. College students really are something else, man. My school is a nursing and engineering school full of the people that will be staffing hospitals and designing the technology of tomorrow. I cannot tell you how many times I was woken in the middle of the night because one of these beacons of the future took way too much green herb and put a burrito in the microwave with the foil still on it. I mean, we had numerous people forget to add water to the instant noodle cup, but leaving the foil wrap on something is probably way worse. Oh, that awkward period between leaving high school and becoming real adults with jobs. We learn a lot of important lessons during our years in college, like what not to do in the kitchen, so that when you inevitably move into your own flat, you don't burn it down around you. Not everyone learns it early enough, I guess. It was in my local paper. It turned out to be my friend's older brother. He tried to smoke out bees in the loft and set fire to the insulation in there, and burnt the whole house down. My father was a Boston firefighter for more than 30 years. One of his more memorable stories was a foreign family who'd ripped up their cast iron bathtub and built an open flame underneath it. They used the tub as a giant oil fryer. Naturally, this didn't work out very well and the house caught fire. To add to the insanity even more, the family absolutely refused to let my dad and his co-workers in without taking their boots off, which of course they couldn't agree to. Just crazy. I was a chef before I was on a volunteer fire department for a bit, and this was at a restaurant down the street from my old one. Cooks at this restaurant forgot to plug the drain in the deep fryer. So what happened was they put oil in a fryer which drained immediately right before lunch, turned on said fryer, and that's when the coils caught fire. So not only did they spill 5 gallons of oil, burn a fryer, fill a restaurant with smoke, and kill the service day, this was the second time it had happened. My uncle is a firefighter, and the answer is Christmas trees. If they dry out, they become a ticking time bomb. He used to do an annual demonstration where he'd let a Christmas tree dry out for a few months, and then he'd take it outside and ignite it. The flames would shoot 40 feet in the air and the tree would be gone in a few seconds. It was mightily impressive to behold, and I'm sticking with artificial trees. Firefighter here. One extremely cold night, the temperature was -11, with wind chills in the -40s. This guy tries starting a fire in his fireplace and couldn't get it started. He decides to use gasoline. He dumps half a gallon on the firewood stacked by the door and the other half onto the wood in the fireplace. As he attempted to light the fire, he couldn't get the lighter to work. Now the vapors are really starting to build up. He then goes to the kitchen, which adjoins the room with the fireplace, to use the stove to light some newspaper. As soon as he turned the knob on the stove, the igniter lit the gasoline vapors. The living room was instantly on fire. The vapors singed all his hair and he got first-degree burns on his hands and face. We, on the other hand, spent the next few hours in the extreme cold. Flash ahead 3 hours, now the firewood outside has somehow ignited and we have to go back. The second fire had some time to really grow. In the middle of the night, everyone was in bed with no one around. The longest, coldest night of all my life, all because some fool decided to use gasoline to start a fire indoors. I set my parents' bathroom on fire while getting up from the toilet. My mum used to leave potpourri simmering in a small bowl on the back of the toilet with a candle to heat and stew it just below. As I was getting up, I somehow knocked the apparatus off the back of the commode. We had carpet floors in that bathroom, and that section of the floor caught pretty quickly. The fire then found a seam in the wallpaper and ignited the glue fairly easily as well. As the flames rose, it caught the roll of toilet paper on the way up the wall, which really accelerated things. All of this took less than 30 seconds, and I remember being somewhat mesmerized at the path the flames traveled. I also remembered that I'd flushed the toilet before realizing what had happened. I somehow thought to grab the toilet bowl brush, shove it into the commode to get it wet, and then beat out the flames. The aftermath was surprisingly minimal. The small section of carpet was destroyed, but my parents replaced the carpet everywhere a few years later. The wallpaper wiped clean with some hot water and a rag, and thankfully there was only a little permanent smoke damage on the ceiling, which has seemed to fade over time. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Mid-80s, near the beginning of my career. A young lady finished putting flea spray on her pupper when she noticed a tick embedded in its flank. You ever hear of the tick removal technique in which you blow out a match and touch the hot tip to the tick, thereby causing it to back out of the dog? Yeah, the dog caught fire. The little fellow ran under the bed, which also caught fire. The lady grabbed the pup with the flea spray still on her hands, and they too caught fire. Long story short, the house was a mess, but both the lady and the dog fortunately survived with moderate burns. There was also the lady who tried to sanitize her panties in the microwave, but thankfully I was off that day. Family friend decided to make major renovations on their home with no background in construction or carpentry. They also didn't bring a professional to ensure that their renovations were up to fire code. Lo and behold, an exposed wire sparked a fire in the middle of the night and burned down their entire home. They have 3 kids and are very fortunate they were all able to escape the fire without any injuries. To make matters even worse, they had no house insurance. Extreme libertarians that didn't believe in insurance or debt. So they ended up having to rely on a GoFundMe fundraiser, set up by a relative, to recover financially. Last I heard, they were still living in a hotel, trying to figure out their next plan of action. The story alone reaffirms my belief that some things are better left to the professionals. Even if you're trying to cut costs, it might be best to pay a little extra to have someone with experience do something for you instead. This avoids terrible situations like this. See, there are a lot of things the narrator will slog through and do a terrible job at in order to save money. Things involving high voltage are not on that very long list. The same with flammable gases. Yay, my $50,000 in materials house went up in flames within 5 minutes of me turning the lights on. That would be the title of my newsletter that week. This one happened in my building. In India, generally you have a small praying place in your house, like a little version of a temple, a shrine. You light a lamp every day and pray there. In this particular case, the family decided to keep this thing on a fricking refrigerator. The lamp fell behind the fridge due to wind from the window adjacent to it. The condenser caught fire and literally exploded. The whole floor was then on fire. Luckily, no one was home. It was a really dumb decision to keep a temple on a fricking fridge. This one happened in a certain mall here in Monterrey, Mexico. We have a Freaky Plaza, a little mall where all the geeks, gamers, and otakus go to, and on the second floor someone was smoking while playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And since he didn't want to throw his ashes on the floor and the trash can was far away from him, he decided to make a paper ashtray. Yeah, that didn't work out well, especially when 3 of his friends decided to use it as well. So here in Argentina we have El Cordero a la Cruz, basically cooking a whole lamb with an open fire. And well, it just so happens that pines are really flammable. And if you make an unprotected fire in a floor covered in pine leaves near a blooming pine, well… Ooh, I have 2! The first is that once my neighbor stole 15 propane tanks and decided to make a DIY blowtorch. By neighbor, I mean he lived below us. We were giving him our basement. He almost lit the house on fire, but then he tripped on something and fell over. The next morning we looked and saw it had burned a little bit, but not much. He was also very drunk that day. And the second was that once we lived in a basement suite, and the people who lived above us were making toast at 2 a.m. And they used a fork to get it out, but the fork hit something, so the toaster caught fire. And my mum tried to wake me up, but I just pulled my blanket over my head and said, "I just want to sleep a little more." And then my mum said the house could burn down, and I was the first one out of my house. My neighbors forgot they had ferrets inside. We grabbed our dog, but they didn't grab their ferrets. The fire department came, but my neighbors could have put out the fire if they unplugged the toaster and put baking soda on it. Settle in, folks. Mr. Homeowner was attempting to deep-fry tater tots in a saucepan of oil on a gas stove. The oil frothed up when the frozen tots hit the surface, igniting the whole thing. Mr. Homeowner then proceeded to try and grab the pan by the handle and swing it over the sink. I imagine it was like a Vietnam-era napalm run. Well, he managed to spread the fire across the linoleum floor and in a panic let go of the pan, launching it, the remaining burning oil, and tots into the laundry basket, which was full of freshly dried clothes. In the ensuing panic, Mr. Homeowner thought he could try to get the flaming laundry basket out to the back porch. Well, he only managed to knock the flaming basket off the table, and it tumbled off the table and straight down into the basement, leaving a nice trail of burning oil-soaked towels all the way down. Now, Mr. Homeowner decides to make egress out of the back kitchen door, down the stairs into the backyard. He slightly missed the stairs, hit his bare right foot on one of the railing posts, breaking a couple of toes, and then flew forward off the staircase, managing to impale himself onto a bit of rebar that was protruding from a cement block that they were using as a sort of barrier on the edge of the cement patio. And there he stayed, clad only in boxer shorts. He managed to nick his liver pretty badly, but somehow survived. Did I mention he had burned his legs up pretty badly as well? So, the smells and smoke and the screams of Mr. Homeowner at finding himself struck through with a piece of rusty iron alerted Big Mama, Mr. Homeowner's girlfriend, and their punk teen kids number 1 and 2 upstairs. They realize something's afoot. As far as we can tell, Big Mama went looking for the kids or the dogs, both the dogs had already made it out, over the raging laundry and oil combo fire one flight below. She found Mr. Homeowner on the back patio, bleeding and turning grey, screaming and trying to get off the piece of metal. The punk teen kids, with the dogs, climbed out of a side bedroom window to the side porch roof. The older punk teen kid, about 16 years old, managed to tumble off. He didn't land well. I think he ended up breaking his arm pretty badly. The dogs and the younger ones got pulled off that roof by the neighbors. Big Mama apparently had a significant cardiac event and fell over. She happened to do so in the junk room, a sort of Collier Brothers-style room filled shoulder-high with stacked boxes of junk. By the time we got there, it was just a charred, soaked mess of black slop about waist deep. We had to dig Mama out of it. That was wretched. All of this attracted the attention of the many foreign laborers who were living in the boarding house next door. They helped the best they could, but also became a very raucous audience. A few of them were bomberos voluntarios back in Guatemala, and having an entire company of mostly non-English-speaking volleys show up intent on going to work made things very interesting. 2 of these guys saved Mr. Homeowner's life, though. I have never, in my 27 years of doing this, arrived on a scene of such screaming and chaos. Thank you, dear author, for a very well-written and illustrative description of this absolutely chaotic, raging inferno and many resulting medical episodes that resulted from it, and all because my man wanted some tater tots. In the apartment building I stayed in, I had a pretty good fire. A guy threw a lit cigarette in a coffee can full of butts. It was on the far side of the building from us, so my upstairs neighbor and I got to stay. Everyone else had to move. We were dealing with water leaks for almost a year after that. It took them so long to sort out insurance stuff and to make repairs. They finally put on a new roof a few weeks before we moved. Someone tried to make a gummy bear lamp like in iCarly to test if it's really going to burn, and then his house was on fire. A news article I read, one guy had a fishbowl in his garden shed. The sunlight was focused through the bowl from his kitchen window. Whoomph. My partner's a firefighter. He said the dumbest one was where a man tried to barbecue in his basement. This gentleman's reasoning? I don't want to go outside and risk exposure to the coronavirus. It would be safer to do it here in the basement. Not a firefighter, but I read a story about a woman that started a fire because her firefighter friends were bored. Mine was stupid, but reasonable. There was a spider. By far the dumbest is people smoking while on medical oxygen, like the tanks are coated in labels about how inflammable it is. I was living in a big old single-family home that had been converted into 6 apartments. Because it was a house, it had a shingle roof. The owner hired one of those unlicensed, uninsured type outfits to work on the roof. The kind you find hanging out at Home Depot in the morning looking for jobs. Anyways, long story short, the guy was on the roof, smoking, and somehow caught it on fire. Rather than dialing 911, he ran down 3 flights of fire escape, got the garden hose, ran it back up, and once he got to the top, he realized he'd never turned the hose on. So he ran back down, turned it on, and ran back up. Apparently by that time, it was out of control, so he headed off. One of the neighbors finally called 911, but by then it was on full blaze, destroyed the top 2 floors and most of the first floor. Moral of the story is, just call the professionals. What movie could you turn around and say that the good guy was really a complete butthole in? Tom and Jerry. Tom is just a poor house cat trying to fight off the food-stealing, property-destroying, and teasing little vermin that is Jerry. I love Rent, but seriously, it's about a bunch of teenagers who refuse to pay their rent because their friend and landlord Benny told them a while ago that they could live there rent-free, and now he's asking for them to contribute a bit. So they screw with Benny's business dealings and kill his dog. And then he pays for Mimi to go to rehab? He's definitely the good guy in the movie if anyone is. Benny buys a building, lets his friends live in it for free, comes up with a business plan that would allow them to build a studio that would let them work on their craft. They would still be living rent-free by building condos over the studio and using the rent from the condos to help keep the studio open. The only thing I can see wrong with him is that he's a sucker who keeps allowing people around him to take advantage of his generosity. Mark is a failed screenwriter who villainizes the people he should be grateful to. He ignores his own parents on Christmas because they irritate him, despite them obviously caring a lot for him and missing him. And then he launches an attack on the one person who's trying to help him succeed by supporting him. Roger is a former smack addict who fancies himself a tortured artist, but all he does is sit on his butt in the apartment feeling sorry for himself. Mimi is a 19-year-old smack-addicted exotic dancer who pushes substances on others and has a YOLO philosophy on life. Tom Collins is a bright, intelligent young man who could have had a great future ahead of him if he hadn't vandalized expensive electrical equipment at MIT and got himself fired. So his solution is to mooch off an old acquaintance and drink Stoli while rewiring ATMs. Maureen is a narcissistic, untalented performing arts artist with no morals or sense of loyalty. She's unfaithful, manipulative, and only cares about herself. Angel is a street drummer who appears sweet and kind to all those around him, and yet has no qualms about killing an AITA he had no beef with, or breaking and entering. Joanne falls into the category of sucker. She's an uptight Ivy League graduate who finds herself in over her head when she meets someone who tries to teach her to let her hair down. The music in Rent is brilliant. The storyline is awful. I know some big musical fans who I feel like I can never bring up this new dark knowledge that I now possess to. I guess I'll just carry it with me to my grave. Such is the life. It's yours and my burden to bear, listeners. Peter Pan, as it is clearly said that Peter cut off Hook's hand for no reason. And the Lost Boys? Wendy and her brothers? They're just little kids who were taken from their rooms in the middle of the night to go live with a strange little boy in the middle of nowhere. And in the books, Peter kills the boys once they enter puberty. I think it makes a point to say that he's the only one with a weapon, his knife. The boys who escape him become the pirates and they're devoted to killing Peter Pan so he doesn't kill any more boys. I also think they're trapped on the island, not sure about that though. I read the novel when I was 8. Aladdin. He lies the entire time to get Jasmine, and it works. Serendipity. Both the lead male and female were narcissistic buttholes who crapped all over their devoted significant others. The Leprechaun movies. The guy would happily mind his own business if people would just stay the heck off his gold. Squidward minds his own business. He just wants to paint his art and play the clarinet. In fact, you can type Squidward into Google Images, and you basically just get a load of facial expressions of someone being persecuted by his neighbors. He is a bit pretentious, though. The Girl in the Notebook. She cheated on her fiancé and then left him. Animal House is a movie about a college dean simply trying to retain order and safety amongst the Greek system, and the fraternity responds by doing the deed with the dean's wife and mayor's underage daughter. A fraternity member poses as the boyfriend of a deceased sorority member to get a date, and the fraternity eventually destroys the town's parade. Chores. They're hunting a shark because they're mad that it kills people in the ocean. Heavyweights. A bunch of morbidly obese children imprison the camp's owner for encouraging them to better themselves. Dead snow. The zombies just wanted their stuff back from those D-bag medical students. Fred from Scooby-Doo. There are a variety of reasons why he's always the biggest villain in the series and movies, but probably the most pertinent is his exploitation of Shaggy and Scooby. Shaggy and Scooby are petrified of ghosts, but are always the pair that take the most risks in being human bait in one of Fred or Velma's master plans. Why? Scooby snacks. Fred realizes the two are addicted to Scooby snacks. Heck, Fred himself probably spikes them with white snow or something, so he abuses his monopoly over them to exploit Shaggy and Scooby's addiction. So addicted are the pair that they forgo all of their fears of ghosts just to get a hit. So when Fred says, "Hey guys, why don't you volunteer?" he already knows the answer will be a zombified yes if he promises Scooby snacks or intoxicates the pair on Scooby snacks beforehand. It's similar to promising smack to an addict, provided they do something they're usually scared of. Does the addict really have a choice? No. Fred got Scooby and Shaggy addicted to substances so they'd be more prone to taking risks. The Wizard of Oz. I'm not suggesting Dorothy was evil, but she killed a woman and just accepted that what she'd done was okay because a bunch of little people she'd never met told her the woman was wicked. Seriously, if someone dropped a house on my sister and then proceeded to take her clothing, put the clothing on and then prance off down the road while singing, I'd send winged monkeys after them too. One that's really annoyed me since I've seen it? Happy Feet. The moral of the entire story is, if nature wants to save itself from mankind, it needs to learn how to entertain us better. Seriously, nature isn't entertaining enough for mankind to care, is what Happy Feet's writers seem to say. The Little Mermaid. Seriously, it's a spoiled 16-year-old mermaid who throws a huge fit and becomes obsessed with a complete stranger. Then she makes a deal with the Sea Witch so that she can have legs and run off to marry the complete stranger. Okay, maybe this doesn't necessarily make her a bad person, but what the frick kind of lifestyle is Disney trying to portray as a good way to live? I read an incredibly detailed essay about Michael Bay's Transformers films on the Something Awful forums, if I recall correctly, that said, among other things, Optimus Prime was the series' main villain and Megatron was, if not the hero, then far more traditionally heroic. From what I remember, if you compare Optimus's narration throughout the three movies and what is revealed of the war on Cybertron through dialogue, it becomes very clear that Optimus is an unreliable narrator and the Autobots were an outsider group who, having conclusively lost the war, were willing to end their own species. Destroying the Allspark would cut off all possibility of continuing the species after all, as well as revenge killings. All of the Decepticons they and the military hunted down in the second movie, who weren't shown as being aggressive. Megatron's character arc has him, after winning the first war, traveling to Earth to retrieve the Allspark so his race can continue, then getting frozen by pure chance, getting discovered, studied, and having his body violated to make our technology, finally escaping with the help of a few loyal friends, only to discover that his old enemies are in league with the creatures who've been dissecting him for the last century. Having one of the creatures, a particularly annoying one, use the object he's been striving for to kill him, and then after getting resurrected, trying to keep his people together while being usurped twice, and all the while being hunted by Optimus and those monstrous, bloodthirsty humans. Not that this wasn't a particularly fun perspective and all, but I'm pretty sure that the guy who wrote the theory put more thought into Michael Bay's Transformers than Michael Bay ever did. And I'm not even a Michael Bay hater, I love me a good pew-pew CGI robots movie. But yeah, there was no way he was thinking on this level. Let's not beat around the bush. In Toy Story 1, Woody is a massive, selfish jerk who's jealous of Buzz and tries to kill him. He doesn't try to kill him, his intention was to knock him behind the desk so that Woody would be taken to Pizza Planet instead. The plan went awry when Buzz dodged. The dentist on Finding Nemo. They make him out to be some kind of kidnapper, but he was just trying to find a nice present for his special needs niece. Mate, you can't just call Australian kids special need kids. Mrs. Doubtfire. Robin Williams is a creepy dad stalking his old family. The Harry Potter series. Dumbledore. He's manipulative and out for the greater good, even if it means setting a child up to face death. Even if Harry didn't die, he thought he would. Not to mention his association with Grindelwald, and the fact that he knew so much information and could have saved a lot of time if he'd just told Harry to begin with. But of course, J.K. Rowling did a brilliant job with the series, and I know that if Dumbledore did say anything, the books and movies would not have been as epic as they were. And I know full well that this isn't a popular opinion. I know that he had to be that way to protect the wizarding world. I just answered the question when I noticed that no one else had mentioned Dumbledore yet. I have read Methods of Rationality. Beauty and the Beast. A man tries to save his love from a crazy beast who almost killed her father and practically enslaved her. I mean, this take would work if Gaston wasn't such an insufferable jerk. Hamlet. He murders his uncle based on the testimony of a fricking ghost. Come on, son. That's the point of his wishy-washiness the whole play. The real evidence, while mostly circumstantial, but enough for Hamlet, was his uncle flinching and leaving during the play within a play. Law-abiding citizen. Starship Troopers. It's all government propaganda to make themselves seem superior. The bugs didn't launch AmITheA, they just became a media scapegoat for the meteor strike on Buenos Aires. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Pirates of the Caribbean. Jack was a pirate, but they made the English the bad guys for persecuting him. I know that's the point of the story, but it still bothered me as a child. I think the reason Jack is considered heroic is because they never necessarily showed him doing piratey things throughout all 4 movies. We never see him steal from or kill the innocents, as pirates were prone to doing. We just see a mischievous guy who goes on grand adventures and treasure hunts. Also, I would say that the English are evil in the same way Hank from Breaking Bad is evil. Which is to say they aren't, they're just lawful. And since the heroes go up against the law, that puts them at odds. Avatar. The humans were industrious and ambitious, and the aliens were lazy. Assuming Jared Diamond is correct, the Na'vi have everything going for them. Superior crops, massive horses, and fricking birds. A global neurological database. They should have become a Type 2 civilization by the time we got to Pandora, but they're too fricking lazy. Frick them, they can die. Avatar, the movie where a crippled human betrays his race for a local girl and escapes all the repercussions for it. Furthermore, not only does he get away with it, he's rewarded for his treason with a new body and acceptance into an alien culture. Proof that if you believe hard enough and betray everything you and everyone around you has worked for, you'll be richly rewarded. Until the humans slam a quintillion-kilogram asteroid traveling at 0.3 c into the planet in order to mine the remnants in space. I don't think the narrator can agree with the assessment that the aliens are the bad guys just for living more or less in harmony with nature or becoming, a super civilization that colonizes everyone else. You can't call them lazy when they live and die swinging through the trees and navigating perilous carnivores, whilst maintaining an egalitarian society that goes toe-to-toe with the industrial military might of Earth. That's a bad take, people. Imagine that you are from Cuba. You grew up shunned and ignored by the USA. In fact, the USA is a distant opponent that you don't know a lot about. You do know that they have a garrison on Cuba, and you know that they keep a military presence here that makes you uneasy. Let's just say that one day, soldiers from that garrison kill your only family members. You're so mad that you join a multinational freedom fighter force that plots to destroy the USA. Just after you join, escaping their military and fleeing your country, you learn that the USA has invaded and effectively destroyed the government of the nation you were headed towards, Panama. You are outraged and vow revenge. Through a series of misadventures, you find your boat taken captive on board an aircraft carrier, the Nimitz, from the USA. You manage to escape, liberating a political prisoner, but your best friend dies in the process. Not only do you hate the USA, you hate the symbol of American oppression, the Nimitz. You flee to Grenada, but learn that the Nimitz is on the way, leading to a plan to topple that country as well. Desperately, you go out in speedboats to attach a bomb to the nuclear reactor. Almost all your fellow freedom fighters die in the attempt, but against all odds, you succeed. The bomb goes off and thousands die. You'll be hailed as a hero by your fellow freedom fighters, but in the USA, you'll be reviled as a villain of the worst sort and a murderer on a massive scale. They'll devote all of their resources to killing you and your peers. From their perspective, you are the bad guy. So what movie am I talking about? Star Wars. Cuba is Tatooine, the USA is the Empire, the freedom fighters are the Rebellion, Panama is Alderaan, Granada is a moon of Yavin, Nimitz is the Death Star. It's all about perspective. National Treasure. Nicolas Cage was the bad guy, and at worst, Sean Bean was misunderstood. Think back to the very beginning of the movie. Sean Bean and Nick Cage are both treasure hunting together. They've been a good team together. They've been working together well. Heck, Sean Bean has been funding the entire operation. Then they finally find the clue that tells them that the map is on the back of the Declaration of Independence. Sean Bean suggests that they borrow the map. Nicolas Cage suddenly and strangely says no. "I'm not going to let you steal the Declaration of Independence," and essentially implies that he would stop Sean Bean from getting the Declaration. Think about this for a minute. These two are friends. They've been working together for years. And suddenly, when they're so close, Nick Cage goes, "Sorry, I'm not going to let you get the treasure." And then, to top it all off, Nick Cage steals the Declaration of Independence himself. He justifies it by saying that to stop Sean Bean from stealing the Declaration, he, Cage, must steal it first. What? That's like if I was working in a bank robbery group and then decided that to prevent the bank robbery from happening, I should rob the bank first and keep the money for myself. It makes no sense and is a clear betrayal. Why didn't Cage just work with Sean Bean in the first place, and the two could have shared the treasure together like they'd planned? Finally, at the end of the movie, Nick Cage basically frames Sean Bean for the theft of the Declaration. Remember, Nick Cage stole the Declaration. The FBI agent specifically said that someone has to go to jail. Nick was caught and is on film with the Declaration of Independence. How did he not go to jail? Instead, Sean Bean goes, for doing what? He never stole the Declaration of Independence. Yeah, he might have done some other stuff like kidnapping, violence, etc., but those were justified because he had been betrayed by Cage. And there are lots of other little details throughout the movie showing Nick Cage's trickery and deception against Sean Bean. From the very beginning, it's made out like he used Sean Bean and his vast resources just to find the clue in that boat. And even when Sean Bean broke Nick Cage out of police custody, remember, Sean Bean was helping Nick Cage out here, Nick Cage was still pulling little tricks, hiding the truth, and not telling Sean Bean everything he knew, which they had made an agreement to do. Seriously, rewatch this movie, look at it very closely, and tell me how Sean Bean is the bad guy here. The entire movie, Nick Cage is pulling the tricks, hiding the ball, and betraying Sean Bean, who was his friend at the beginning of the movie. And just answer this very simple question. Nicolas Cage stole the Declaration of Independence. So why didn't he go to jail? In short, Sean Bean wasn't the bad guy in National Treasure, and Nick Cage was because he betrayed Sean Bean at the very beginning of the movie and essentially framed him as stealing the Declaration of Independence. Did you forget how the movie begins with betrayal and Sean trying to kill Nick? Or how Nick tries to go to the authorities first to warn them that someone will try to steal the Declaration, but they all ignore him due to his family's history? Or how, at the end, Sean leaves Nick and the crew in a pit, seemingly to starve to death? You're kind of reaching here, my friend. Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He skipped school, convinced his girlfriend to skip school, dragged his sick friend out of bed, and made his friend steal his father's incredibly expensive car. Ed Rooney was a hardworking educator. Most faculty in his position would have sighed, rolled their eyes, and shrugged Ferris's chronic absenteeism off. But Dean Rooney went above and beyond the call of duty, actually going out to track Ferris down and get his life back on track. And I know the actor who played Rooney was an awful man, you can all stop mentioning it. And I know that the character made it personal and crossed a bunch of lines, but that doesn't change the fact that A, he was doing his job, and B, Ferris was a self-entitled jerk and breaking the law left and right. Yeah, I think that everyone in the audience was well aware that Bueller isn't meant to be a saint, he's just a little craphead who's looking for a good time and takes us along with him. But I guess me pointing it out doesn't make it contrary to the point of this video. However, it does make me laugh thinking about people coming out of this movie white-fisted with rage about how awful this boy was for playing hooky from school. It always bothered me about how Rose, upon surviving the Titanic, went and got married and lived a happy life. The whole shebang. Once she dies, however, is when crap hits the fan. Does she go see her loving husband who spent his life with her? No, she goes with a dude she had a little fling on a boat with. Crap pisses me right off. Justin Bieber, never say never. 500 Days of Summer. Tom. I'm not sure that Summer could be the good guy or Tom could be the bad guy, just that they're guys. I think that's what the movie does so well. It paints them off as complex people living in shades of grey. Tom does idealize her, but I don't think that makes him bad. I think everyone has idealized a significant other or a crush at some point, and Summer told him that she wasn't looking for something serious, so I can't blame her for that. And yet, they were a couple and she refused to acknowledge that fact. Bottom line is that both are exceedingly well-written characters. The all-time D-bag good guy in a movie was Santa Claus in the classic stop-motion Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. What a narcissistic, self-serving, porcine SOB. He has zero empathy for anyone else's problems and has the gall to tell Rudolph's dad that his son had better outgrow the red nose if he wants to be on the sleigh team someday. It's pretty ironic that a human manatee in a red suit is ostracizing someone else based off their appearance. By the way, I'm a big boy, so I've got a bit of slack when it comes to the fat jokes. Rudolph's dad is no hero either. Frickin' suck-up. His reindeer lips are locked firmly around old Kris Kringle's candy cane. He's totally on board in shaming his son for daring to look different. And let's not forget how he treated the elves after they spent so much time and energy groveling before him, celebrating his bowl full of jelly butt by singing his praises. It was very clear that Santa gave exactly zero fricks about the elves and their hosannas. I guess every slave owner has the same opinion. It's too bad they made the man in red look like such a squirming bag of Johnsons. Really casts a pall on my Christmas memories, considering how much I cherished that show when I grew up. Didn't really figure out how messed up it was until I hadn't seen it in years and watched it as an adult. In short, Santa is a jiggling bag of crap who treats Rudolph and the elves like they were toenail dirt. What are the dumbest questions you've had to field out of nowhere? A few months ago, a TSA officer asked me about the intention of your eyeglasses. I told him, so that I can see, and went on my way. My friend was stopped by a TSA agent after arriving at LAX and taken into a separate room for questioning. He has a lazy eye and looks like he's on something pretty much all of the time. Another agent walked up to his dad and asked in a really aggressive voice, "Is there anything you don't know about your son that we should know about?" A TSA agent in Vermont was checking out my hunting shotty before sending it through to be loaded onto the plane. He comes up to me after a few minutes and asks, "This weapon is tested positive for explosive residue." I said, "Like gunpowder?" TSA dude said, "Oh," and hangs his head and walks away. My 5-year-old is mixed ethnicity, doesn't obviously look like me to people not used to seeing mixed kids, and doesn't speak English. So when I took him to the US via San Francisco last time by myself, I was quite seriously interrogated until I finally told them, "It's too bad you don't have any agents who speak Japanese, or you could just ask my son." Of course, I said this while pointing at an agent a few meters away whose name tag read Maruyama. They called her over, and in about 5 seconds it was cleared up. "Hi little boy, what's your name?" Then confirmed with passport, "And who's this?" "Okay, you and your dad have a nice trip." I have a cochlear implant, with a magnet embedded in my skull to hold the device in place. I never go through the metal detectors at airports. I always have the stupid feeling up process. One time I went through and they asked me why I wanted the pat-down. Refraining from smart aleck jokes, I told them it was because of my cochlear implant. They didn't believe me and asked me to take it out to show them. I showed them the external processor. They wanted to see the magnet part, despite my telling them it was under my scalp, placed in a niche in my skull where the bone had been removed. Even viewing the 3-inch scar, they still wanted to know why I couldn't take it off so I could have passed through the detector. It's not wise to challenge or to giggle at times like that. A supervisor came out, asked almost exactly the same questions, received the same answers, and then let me go after the pat-down. It's never happened again, but I must admit it blew my mind. Okay, so this topic is so far a wall-to-wall smearing of the TSA, which is absolutely hilarious, but hopefully we get some variety in soon. What on earth is the hiring process there? Is failing social studies, science, math, and physical education a compulsory criteria to get a job there? While getting hassled in a sobriety checkpoint, the cop asked the driver where he got his license. Our driver responded with, "The DMV." The cop didn't seem to know how to respond. Not a question, my sister's first name is Katie. Just Katie, not Catherine or Kathleen or anything. Just Katie. When my mum picked her up from preschool one day, the teacher said to my mother, "She won't respond to anything other than Katie." And my mum just went, "Yeah, well, that's her name." I'm currently 9 months pregnant and work in a restaurant. I'm very obviously pregnant. My belly is ginormous and the rest of me is small. I was seating this woman and she asked why I was limping. "It's called waddling, lady." I said, "Oh no, I'm not limping, I'm pregnant." She looked at my belly. "Pregnant? I would never have guessed that. How far?" 9 months. "Oh my god, are you going into labor now?" "Not to my knowledge." What the frick, people? At an interview, HR lady asked me to, quote, "Name 5 things you're not." I quipped, Batman, a porcupine, on fire, purple, and bubblegum. She looked confused, made a note, and continued with the interview. I got the job. I work as a receptionist for a lawyer, and there's always a client who demands to speak to my boss even though I've told them already that he isn't in and the time he will be in. "I want to speak to the lawyer. He's in court at the moment, but he'll be here after 2 p.m. Did you want to leave a message or call back?" "No, I want to speak to him now." "Okay, great. I can speak to him?" "No, unfortunately, the lawyer is in court and won't be in the office until after 2 p.m. You can leave a message or call back after 2 p.m. when he's here." "What's in the bag, ma'am?" "My groceries? I checked out not 10 feet away from you. Bloody security." I got in a bullcrap accident with a taxi driver who thought lawsuits were part of his income. At the deposition, his lawyer kept asking and aggressively repeating questions that I have to assume trip some people up. His lawyer asked, in a condescending tone, "And why were you going to the library?" I looked right into his eyes and calmly said, "Because I like to read." Deposition over. What is this? He's going through my diabetes kit and found my Lancet cartridges. Really? It's a Lancet to prick my finger for diabetes blood glucose monitoring. I can't let you take this on the aircraft. "Sir, that's not an option of yours. TSA policies specifically allow diabetes and other medical testing supplies. Get me your supervisor." We were interrupted by the supervisor ripping the crap out of him. Flat out dismissed him so he can study the policies again, apologized to me, and let me on my way. TSA can be flat out irritating at times, but some of them at least try not to suck. Took a job transfer to another country. I had all of my belongings in a rental truck. Border security. "Why are you bringing a lawnmower into the country?" "Because I own it?" I would have said to periodically reduce the length of grass on my property. My phone number is 1 digit away from a PNC bank, and I get calls about it once or twice a week. You'd be surprised how many people don't believe me when I try to correct them. The conversation always goes as follows. "Hello, PNC?" I say, "Sorry, you have the wrong number," and I give them the right one. "That's what I dialed." "Are you sure this isn't the PNC?" "Hold on, let me check." "Alright, yes, I just double-checked. I'm in my boxers drinking beer and watching He-Man. I sincerely hope I'm not working in a bank right now. I'd probably lose my job." These phone calls are hilarious, and no, they never believe that they have the wrong number, and they think this is all a prank we're playing with our own livelihoods. I used to have a lot of people mistaking my number for a local restaurant. When I answered, "Hello, my name's speaking, this is not that restaurant," you would hear a few slow seconds of stupid face, followed by, "Is this the restaurant?" Some people really want to will things into existence, I guess. When I was crossing the border from Canada to the States with my cousin, and the Border Patrol guy asked us how we're related, and we told him, and he said, "You guys are cousins but have different last names. Explain that to me." And we just stared at him, and I started laughing. TSA asked me, "Would you do me a favor and type in your password for us?" I said, "No." I'm walking home from a friend's house in my neighborhood one night. As I'm crossing the street, a police officer shines his spotlight on me and says, "Hey kid, why are you crossing the road at this time of night?" And without thinking, the smart aleck me says, "To get to the other side." And with that, I was on my way. About 10 years ago, I worked at a fast food job and I had to wear a name tag, as one does at fast food jobs. A young guy came up to the counter one day, squinted at my name tag and said, "John, is that your name?" "Nah, dude. They just give us these things with random names on them." I tried chatting up a girl at summer camp. I started and ended the conversation with, "So, are you here for camp?" My hair is very, very red, so I often get people who are incredulous as to its hue. However, because I'm pale, freckled, and have red eyebrows, people usually realize it's natural. Once a woman walked up to me, grabbed some of my hair and said, "I love this color. What salon do you go to? I want them to do my hair just like this." I backed away, trying to get her to let go of my hair, and awkwardly said, "No, it's my natural color, no salons for me." The woman then got really close to me and whispered, "No, really, you don't have to lie to me. I know hair doesn't really come in this color, so where do you get it done? I promise I won't tell. Thank you for your story. I loved your work in Brave." I forgot my badge that gets me into work once. For some reason, of all times, the head of security, who's an ex-cop, was working there. He asks me, "Why did you forget your badge?" I just stared at him. Since I didn't make a conscious decision to not bring it, I had no idea what to say. Finally, I just said, "I don't know how to answer that question." I lost a textbook in high school once, and the teacher, this lady who has a PhD in literature and wore business suits to teach 9th grade English to green herb smokers, was like, "Why did you lose your book?" and demanded an answer. I was like, "I thought it would be a good career move." She explained to me that it wasn't. I was in a deposition related to a car accident. The lawyer asked me, which car struck the other first? I turned to my lawyer and said, "Is she serious?" Later in the same deposition, I was asked, what color was the green light? I did not care for that attorney. Wouldn't you rather be deposed by a stupid attorney than by a smart attorney? Once the TSA frisked my ponytail because it was, and I quote, "too curly." You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I suffered from a collapsed lung earlier this year, and shortly after, I was released from hospital, and a small party was thrown to celebrate me getting home after 26 days in hospital. A girl came up to me and asked, "So, can you, still breathe?" I said, "Of course not." I have a unique name, so this happens a lot. The question is, where did you get that name? From my parents. Almost 20 years ago, I sprained my ankle pretty bad and was taken to the hospital. The next day, a health insurance drone calls our house, wanting a very detailed account of how I got hurt. Her question was, and I quote word by word, "Now tell us, did you sprain your ankle first and then go to the hospital to x-ray your foot? Or did you go to the hospital for x-rays first and then sprain your ankle? Lady, are you freaking stupid or do you just like to pretend that you are?" I was once stopped at the Canadian-American border heading into Canada and was asked if I was carrying anything besides clothes into Canada. I replied, I've got a fifth of vodka in the back." Her next question was, "Do you have any alcohol or tobacco?" I have some vodka in the back." Look, I'm sure that there are perfectly smart border and airline security out there. I'm so sorry that this video is slandering the entire profession. This was not the purpose the narrator set out on. But my gosh, the good security staff out there must have some really interesting stories of their brain-dead colleagues trying to do basic tasks like prepare lunch and burning down the kitchen. Airport security officer asked me what the purpose of the metal wiring on my teeth served, which was a retainer. I told him it was so I could look beautiful. I was once pulled over on the highway for speeding. When the cop asked, "Do you know how fast you were going back there?" I didn't know, so I stared at my dash for a second, then finally answered, "Too fast?" The cop laughed and set me free with a warning. Victory. I once had the police call on me at college for juggling torches. The cop asked me what I was doing, and his next question was, "Why are you doing it outside?" I was at the Canada-US border, between Queenston and Lewiston, on my way to the War of 1812 reenactment at Fort Niagara, New York. I have a cooler in the back seat, a wooden box with a regular plastic cooler inside. It was empty at the time. The border guard asked, "Do you have any firearms or explosives in the cooler?" I said, "No, not in the cooler." "Okay, have a good trip." I did have 2 flintlock muskets and roughly 2 pounds of rifle powder in the trunk, which is why I added "not in the cooler." Another time, same reason and same border crossing, I was crossing with my cousin and they asked us about weapons again. We told them there's 5 flintlocks in the trunk and 4 pounds of rifle powder. The border guard doesn't really care about that, but asks 100 questions about the 9 6-foot wooden tent poles in the car. This one really confused me since it was September 21st, 2001, 10 days after the September 11th incident, and they're more worried about the tent poles than the pounds of explosive powder. I work at Dunkin' Donuts. Customer ordered a large coffee with cream and a medium black. When I handed them to him, he asked, "Which one is which?" I said, "The large one is the large." "If I buy this MacBook today, what will you give me?" A MacBook?" TSA, while looking at our tickets, says to my brother, "Age." My brother had recently had a birthday. So he says, 14. No, 15. There was a pause and then he said, "It changes every darn year." While working on my MA in clinical psychology, I attended a case conference class where we, as student therapists, would discuss our therapy clients over the last week. A young, naive, rich female student described an incident at the ER of the hospital where she worked. A man came in on a gurney that had been shot. I asked him how he felt and he said, "How do you think I feel, you stupid witch? I've been shot 6 times. You know, I really learned a lot that day. My neighbor asked me why I'd been at the system on a Tuesday, like it makes any difference what time punkt I buy my alcohol. Besides, it's augusti. Never heard talas om en nubbe på kräftskivan." When I was in basic training with the army, our drill instructors would say, "Why is the sky blue?" The response we were supposed to give was, "Because God loves the infantry." Infantry color is blue in the US military. The first time my drill sergeant asked me this, I looked at him like he was an idiot and started going off about blue light refracting off the Earth's atmosphere. I used to ride a motorcycle. I used it to commute to work every day for several years. I'd be wearing my riding jacket and pants, boots, and holding my helmet, and someone would invariably ask, "So, you ride a motorcycle?" My standard reply became, "No, I just fall down a lot." TSA was looking at my ID. "Is this you?" Naturally, I say, "No, it's my evil twin." They give me a dirty look. "Please step aside over here, sir." Internally, I'm going, "Why, God?" This happened 2 months ago coming back from Florida. I had to stay back and answer 15 minutes worth of questions in order to prove that I'm not an enemy of America. I got into a car crash. Did you die? My twin sister was pulled by the TSA for having, quote, "too many zippers on her pants." She was wearing cargo pants and had a total of 3 different zippers. What the frick, TSA? A cop pulled me over for doing 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. Trying to come up with a witty line, he said, "Let me see your pilot's license." So I took out my wallet and produced my pilot's license. He let me go. Did he decide that you were in fact actually an aerial vehicle on an approved low pass over the highway? Did you destroy that poor policeman's reality? Walking through a Sam's Club, and the window installer guy comes up to me and goes, "Sir, how are your windows?" And I simply reply, "Oh, they're great, I can see right through them." At a fast food restaurant the other day, the cashier asks, "What would you like?" I say, "A sandwich and tea." "Anything else?" "Just the sandwich and tea." "Would you like anything to drink?" "Just the tea." I'm 23 and Australian. I travel on my own a fair amount. I arrived in the US and started going through customs when I was pulled off into a separate room. After they'd gone through everything, notebooks, texts, washing powder, he looked so very excited about the washing powder. He asked how I could afford to travel and take time off work. I passed or whatever. After they gave me back my passport, I asked what the heck it was all about. They said, "You're a young female traveler. You might have been trying to get a job here. Have you seen your economy?" He had no response to that. My tourist friend on their first day in New York goes up to the MTA employee at the desk. Excuse me, what stop do I get off the subway to get to Grand Central? Grand Central. My dad told me a story when himself and his friends were out drinking underage one night and an officer had caught them. He grabbed a beer bottle that was thrown in the woods next to their car and said, "So, if I take this bottle down to the station, whose fingerprints am I going to find on it?" And my dad said, "Yours now, dummy." Customer says, "If you replace my broken air conditioner, will the new one cool my house?" I said, "If you turn down the thermostat." High school teacher here, one of my students asked, "Mr. Johnson, I checked the grades website and it currently said I have an 88. I'm wondering how far away I am from getting a 90. I said, "You're 2% away." I was answering as a joke while planning to follow up with a discussion of what skills she needs to work on to push through to an A. She says, "Okay, thanks." And then they just frickin' walked out before I could continue. Upon telling people my name, which is a short and unusual name in North America, people often ask me if it's short for anything. The answer is no. They always ask, "Are you sure?" And I glare at them a while, and when that doesn't sink in, "Oh, you're absolutely right. I totally forgot my name is short for," and I make up a bunch of random words. I once was asked the following by a girl who's definitely smart enough to know better while I was standing in front of her. "How was that competition you went to in Wisconsin? Wait, is it still going on? Are you still there?" When I was in recruit training for the US Marine Corps, our squad bay was on the first deck, or floor. One time, someone on a higher deck dropped a bag of trash out the window, and some recruits saw it land on the ground and decided to tell the drill instructor about it. "Sir, this recruit just saw a crap bag fall from the second deck, sir." By crap bag, do you mean recruit? As a former US Army interrogator, I can say that part of our training is to make as few assumptions as possible in our questioning. I'll admit that asking the intention of eyeglasses sounds a little overboard, but some of the questions we were required to ask might make the person want to say, "Duh, isn't it self-evident?" I run into someone I know at the supermarket, and they always say, "Oh, hey, what are you doing here?" "Oh, just hunting elephants." "Excuse me, are there nuts in the butter pecan ice cream?" Also, "Do you sell ice cream here?" after walking past the ice cream case and staring at the menu for a good 5 seconds. I was once at the DMV and the lady asked me if I wore glasses while I was wearing my glasses. This is a legitimate question though. I was asked the same thing while wearing glasses, about to take my picture for my license. I just kind of laughed and asked her, is she required to ask that question? She said yes, because people come in with glasses that aren't prescription, and if they mark that the lenses are required and they're really not, if the person gets pulled over, an officer can write a ticket for not wearing prescription lenses. Some jerk cop pulled me over thinking that I was drunk, noticed my bottle of water in the back seat. He angrily asks me, "What's in that bottle?" "Water." "Why the hell do you carry a bottle of water in your car?" "For drinking." Yada yada yada. Back in high school, I'd gone about 3 days without sleep and was in the principal's office for skipping class, and I was sitting on the chair in front of him, dozing off, generally looking messed up. He said, hardly sincerely, "Are you on something?" I looked at him puzzled for a second and thought of it, so I said, "Yep, a chair." He never liked me. My friend Bonnie is always asked what her name is short for. She answers Bonniesaurus Rex. Rawr. Scientists. What mad supervillain experiment do you actually want to conduct in real life? I want to do a long-term case study on children's microbiome. It would start off with samples of their mother's microbiome, and then when the child is first born, get a sample of theirs, compare it, and continue comparing the two samples throughout chest feeding versus bottle feeding. Also, get a detailed comparison of how the microbiome changes after vaccinations, sickness, and antibiotics. I would basically study every single number 2 this child has, their eating habits, their health conditions, any medications and vaccinations for years. But people want privacy and most wouldn't want to commit to keeping such accurate accounts of their children's food, health, and activities. So it's likely that even if I did this study, it would be difficult to prove all variables were accounted for. And with all the variability, I would need many, many children. The end goal is to see how our microbiome changes throughout your childhood, and note when you may be more susceptible to things depending on the type of microflora you have. Everyone has a different ratio, so essentially, if we can harness the individual's capability of unique flora, We could find a whole new way to tackle illnesses and preventatives for sicknesses that would have significantly less side effects than many other medications. This idea stems from others studying the microbiome and finding that certain ratios of microflora can cause you to get over illnesses quicker when combined with the right medicine, and also help digestive tracts regulate better. But so far, these tests are being done with cancer patients. I think if we're able to see how children are affected, it may bring less possibilities of terminal illness and other illnesses down the road, as well as a faster recovery. And everyone is telling me to have a kid or become a nanny and collect the number 2? No, the point of this study is that it needs to include thousands of participants. I want to take DNA from infamous serial unalivers like Jeffrey Dahmer or Albert Fish or the like and clone them, then have the baby raised in a normal, supportive, loving family. I'd study the kids all through adulthood to see how much is nurture and how much is nature. I experiment on ancient coins. Museums are generally against me doing a full compositional analysis that would involve me dissolving the whole coin in acid, but it sure would tell us a lot more than not. As a student of history, I can confirm that just about every person in my field would have had massive issues with this. However, I'm not sure that the results would lead to any true mad scientist outcome, just a bunch of crying museum custodians and a slightly better idea of the composition of ancient coins. I'm a physician, and I would love to see how far the placebo effect really goes. For those who aren't familiar, the placebo effect is an unexplained phenomena where people who take medications that aren't real but believe they're real have an actual measurable effect on their illness. People with depression who take sugar pills report feeling happier. People with pain who take sugar pills report a decrease to their pain, among other things. I've seen even crazier ones where people think they're having surgery for their bad knee, but the docs just put them under, make an incision on their knee, do nothing, sew them back up, and patients report improvement to their bad knee. So part of me just wants to explore this crap to its full extent. Can we treat chronic illnesses like arthritis, lupus, and bipolar disorder with just placebos? Can you imagine if someone's human immunodeficiency virus viral load decreased while they were eating Skittles and thinking it's a new miracle drug? But it's pretty much just fantasy. You'd have to take 2 groups of the same disease's positive individuals, give one real medicine and the other one Skittles, and this is profoundly unethical. For those of you who are saying that's how clinical trials work, the answer is not really. According to Article 11.3 of the Declaration of Helsinki, which is the ethical guidance of clinicians overseeing clinical trials, it's unethical to use placebo arms if there exists a proven medication for the condition. If you're testing a new drug on your control group, it's whatever the best treatment available on the market is, not a placebo. It's very rare that a disease or condition has no effective treatments out there that would justify the use of a placebo to measure clinical effectiveness. In my human immunodeficiency virus example, this is obviously not plausible. We have meds that lower that particular disease's viral load already. I would like to clone myself. Nature versus nurture. Sorry dude, you can have as many kids as possible with one woman, but you can't clone yourself. I can't even do it once. Identical twins is totally fine also. Experiments with social isolation intrigue me. Raise a child with no language and see what happens. No contact. Wild children give us some insights, but also a sample of the kind of trauma this can produce. Completely and undeniably unethical, incredibly cruel, but so intriguing. This has already been done and documented in the past. There was this king who believed that children raised in complete isolation would naturally speak Greek. So to test this, he ordered a group of babies to be placed in isolation from adults. And a few times per day, midwives would feed or clean them, and the result of this experiment was that every single baby died, even though they were being fed. This reminds me of the chicken boy. The poor child was locked in a chicken coop for the first few years of his life, and as such, he thought he was a chicken. Absolutely tragic, but still fascinating. I want to work on genetically modifying the genes that control our active cones in our eyes. Specifically, I want to try to activate a tertiary cone in the eyes of dogs so that they can see infrared light just like snakes can. In simpler terms, we could make rescue dogs that have infrared vision to help locate missing people or recover people in natural disasters. In even simpler terms than that, I want to make heat-seeking dogs. I want a substance-heavy Olympics where everyone is using something to enhance their performance. to see the true limit of humans. Now, I wouldn't say mad scientist, but medical privacy laws get in the way of a lot of incredibly useful research. Everything has to be so de-identified and confidential that it makes doing any sort of large-scale statistics nearly impossible. You have to make a ton of assumptions because you can't know many details. If I had full access to everyone's medical records, we would probably fix a whole lot of crap. Yeah, I have to admit, it is fascinating to listen to our actual medical and science PhD people talk about the possibilities we could unlock if all ethics were removed. On the other hand, I can see why we can't do these experiments. Take the following one, for example. I'd want to know how long it would take a group of children raised to puberty to figure out about doing the deed. I'm sure they'd figure out pickle and bean tickling on some level, but how long would it take them to figure out tab A into slot B? The subjects could be raised about as normal as possible, but with any mentioning of reproduction and copulation completely removed. And there would be no shame or deterrent while they figure it out. Like the caretakers wouldn't tell them, "We don't do that," if they found out one was whacking the mule, or that two consenting teenagers were touching each other. There would be some kind of explanation with trying to encourage that kind of stuff in private instead of around the others. I'm just curious about how our urge to merge is kind of instinctual in other animals. It doesn't really seem that way with us. We learn from so many different sources nowadays that we don't need to figure it out ourselves. We have the internet, friends and peers, maybe parents, books, TV, and possibly life skills classes in school. What would it be like if we just didn't teach or explain or acknowledge it and see how long it took them to figure it out themselves? There have been documented stories where virgin couples have gone to see a doctor because they couldn't get preggers, and it's been discovered that all they've been doing is lying in bed together and waiting for something to happen. I also read a story once where the guy was inserting his eggplant into the wrong place. Like geographically, he was way off. The typical discovery and clinical testing pipeline of a pharmaceutical process looks something like this. Cell culture, to rodent models, to other animals like primates or rabbits, to humans. If at any step the substance fails the test, either for toxicity or efficacy, the potential medication is nixed, and this process of discovery and clinical testing can take up to 10 years at the cost of billions of dollars. What happens if your model systems can't fully recapitulate the human disease phenotype? So what happens is you've got a medicine that might work really well in the human, but we never know because it gets trashed because there's no response in the house model. Now, I completely understand the ethical concerns with testing on human subjects from the get-go, but if you ask me to don my mad scientist lab coat and goggles, I'd try to push for earlier testing on human subjects. Use the milk from orb spiders to build a better dental filling. By the way, they mix the DNA of spiders with goats at University of Wyoming. From my understanding, these fillings would hypothetically last exponentially longer, would bond to teeth as an organic substance, and are stronger than Teflon. It would also be minimally invasive as to set the groundwork for more invasive medical applications, such as knee replacements. If you fund me, I know the orb goat and dental guys. Identical twins have very similar DNA. If raised exactly the same way without interaction with each other, would they make the same choices? There have been studies done where separated twins chose the same career, marry a woman by the same name, and maybe even call their kids by the same names. It was crazily specific. This actually was a pretty horrifying experiment in the US in the 60s, where they purposefully split twins and adopted them out to separate parents to study them. The documentary 3 Identical Strangers is about it, and really interesting. I'd never do the experiment, but it's hard to overstate how helpful it would be to have large-scale, longitudinal data on how different chemotherapeutic meds and med cocktails affect the evolutionary trajectory of tumors. The problem is that in order to study it, you'd need to 1. Give a large number of people experimental or substandard care, which is highly unethical, and 2. Perform serial surgeries even when they aren't medically necessary, in order to collect tissue samples from the tumors. And since every surgery carries with it some risks, this is also highly unethical. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I would really love to have a hunk of plutonium in the attic above my bedroom. I mean, the right amount would have to be sussed out first, of course. They found out that some buildings in Japan had been made with irradiated steel from stockyards near the blast zones of either Hiroshima or Nagasaki, and the people that lived in them had abnormally long and cancer-free lives, presumably because, there's a scientific term for it where your body comes into some kind of homeostasis with snake venom over long enough exposure to small doses. They think that's what happened with those people and the radiation as well. Their bodies adapted to it and became far less prone to having the big C disease because of it. Also, it would lower my heating bill in the winter. Plus, I really wish we could just use molten salt reactors as well. Honestly, I think the government should give them away to property owners, as it would benefit the United States greatly to have a populace of people off the power grid, powering themselves independently and greenly with a stable power source that'll last more than 100 years for their needs, all while depleting our vast nuclear waste reserves. The economy would benefit, people would be more able to afford housing, and emissions would go down. Again, this is a very interesting idea that could benefit a lot of the human race as a whole, assuming that it goes perfectly to plan and nobody uses the abundance of available radioactive material that would result from it for their own nefarious needs. And we all know that if people can do something bad for their own personal benefit, they would. It's interesting to hear about, though. I'm a chemist, and the answer is anything. Biophysicist here, I would love to investigate CRISPR technology in vivo cancer patients, using the technology to block cleavage from occurring at specific DNA sites. I've studied this in vitro, but experimenting in a live human being could be risky waters. Electrostimulation as a means of regrowing limbs sounds pretty interesting, and I'd love to see the effects on humans. If I recall correctly, one of the problems with this is that the wound site must be kept fresh, and humans bleed out too damn quickly if their wounds aren't able to clot, which would interrupt the growth. Animal and human hybrids. Transferring consciousness to a computer so we can live forever. Or reproductive cloning so everyone can have their own organs for transplantation. I mentioned this in stem cell class one day, and I've been the weird girl ever since. Just having organs or the whole body intact, practically alive but only kept around to service your needs when you need it? If you could clone a whole human body that came to life and interacted in daily life, would it still be your spare organ farm or a whole new human? There's also the problem of the body and organs having the same predisposition you do. So what if your heart that you'd cloned had the same defaults as your now failing heart? I'd love to study language development, like sticking a bunch of babies on a remote island without outside influence and document how they learn to communicate. I want to create miniature elephants. Through ingenious genetic manipulation, I'll be able to miniaturize any living animal. And yeah, I know there's a South Park reference, and also a Jurassic Park the book reference. Mostly, I want a cuddly mini plant that I can socialize as a lovely companion, all while spiking municipal water supplies to shrink the general population and go Godzilla on their butts. That's what you get for making fun of my homemade pie, Karen. I'm an InfoSec guy. Do security researchers count as scientists yet? And I'd love to do social engineering experiments, but they're either illegal or immoral. I'd like to raise babies in various planned conditions, such as without any adult human interaction, without language, indoors only, with different concepts of a family unit, with different concepts of gender roles, and many, many more. Stem cells. Screw morals. Frick where the cells come from, and frick religious objections. Can I fix a person who had a stroke and has half their body paralyzed? In the immortal words of Peter Griffin, why are we not funding this? Transhumanism. I want to see a heavier push towards prosthesis and the like. I have a healthy interest in immortality. We're already seeing huge advancements in prosthetics, biohacking, and extended lifespans. I'm happy to say that out of all of the things in the video up to this point, this one is actually coming along quite well. And it's been around for a very long time when you consider old-timey dental work, hearing aids, pacemakers, among other things. It's not even a question of how, only when. However, considering the insecure nature of most portable devices, IoT in general, the good will come with an unhealthy amount of bad. Say, that's a really nice, super strong prosthetic arm you've got there. It would be a shame if it went all idle hands on you. The narrator finds the prospect of transhumanism oddly terrifying, despite the fact that people would presumably be free to opt out of immortality. There is something highly unnerving to me where we can just choose to not die. I can't put my finger on why, it's a myriad of reasons. Mostly I feel like our brains would continue to degrade despite how much we slow that process, meaning we end up with a bunch of dementia-ridden cyborgs incapable of governing ourselves in the end until we all just break down. Serious answer. I'd take about 1 billion people, lock them into a completely contained living space for their entire lives, and actually science the crap out of what people eat and what their reaction is to what they eat. I would measure every single molecule that goes in and every single molecule that goes out. Measure their weight, their level of hunger, the level of physical activity, everything. What they breathe in, what they breathe out. Number 1, number 2, measure every excretion. We'd know exactly if broccoli is good or if cigarettes are bad or if you should eat eggs. This is obviously impossible and cruel, inhumane, and I would never even suggest it, but at least we'd know if we should eat eggs for breakfast or not. Grafting artificial muscles, even though I don't have any qualifications and stuff. I wouldn't be perceived as a mad scientist, just a profligate researcher. I'd be castigated and my professional reputation would be irrevocably altered, but I'd like to establish the UK's first body farm so we can replicate University of Tennessee's facility to meticulously research human decomposition. Ostensibly, I'd be indulging my personal predilection for prestige, as the justification for a body farm isn't compelling for some entomologists. It's a vanity project in their opinion. Others condemn the idea as a frivolous tourist attraction. People are amenable to donate, we just have nowhere to put them. I work mainly with snake venom, but my friend called me and told me his brother-in-law knows a guy that harvests scorpion venom. It's prohibitively expensive normally, but this guy insisted you didn't have to go through the normal process of acquiring it. So I'm imagining a sweatshop situation with various containers of scorpion venom. I feel like buying and possessing an old milk jug of scorpion juice would at least make me seem mad, to say the least. You'd be a rich mad lad though. Doesn't scorpion venom go for about $40 million per gallon? Use targeted injections of virally encoded opsins, like channel rhodopsins, and some simple signal-to-light converters to get ESP. See into the UV or far red? Sure, why not? Take in Wi-Fi-based data or EMF data? Cool, let's do it. Anything you can build a detector for, if reasonably small, you could then encode in some area of your brain. You could also swap in and out the detector as needed. Going into the dark? Let's go for some infrared. Going for a hike in the woods? How about some inbuilt GPS? I'm left-handed and I've always heard lefties are right-brained or creative and righties are left-brained or logical. I'd like to create a school, pre-kindergarten to 12th grade, that includes boarding where the only difference is that everything inside the school, door handles, computer mouses, sports equipment and scissors, are accommodated for left-handed people. The teachers would all be left-handed as well, but the students will be the usual mix of 90% right-handed and 10% left-handed. Would right-handed kids in this environment use their right brain more because they're forced to be more creative? Would the left-handed kids become more right-brained? Biologist here, and I want to develop an artificial system to grow a baby outside of the womb. The initial tests would involve a donor uterus, likely from a pig or a primate unless we can get a healthy one from a human hysterectomy, which would be connected to an artificial blood supply. This blood supply would be circulated through the 37C incubator using a pump to mimic the heartbeat. As the embryo develops, different chemicals will be pumped into the bloodstream to maintain appropriate levels of HCG, estrogen, progesterone, oxygen, and nutrients. I'd also need to develop a way to efficiently filter out waste. If we could robotize this process, you could leave it running for 9 months and get a fully developed baby without destroying your body. This would also eliminate things like fetal alcohol syndrome and other negative effects of poor diet or substance use during pregnancy. Of course, having said all that, it's highly unethical to test on humans and probably shouldn't be done. Also, very difficult to get all the chemicals and blood compositions right. Astronomer here. I would really love to get a hunk of a neutron star and bring it back to Earth and study it. Neutron stars are, as the name implies, essentially a ball of neutrons, where the amount of mass in the sun is squeezed into the size of a city. This means they're extremely dense, well beyond the labs on Earth. Thus, we don't know much about their properties and how they work. For example, a small fraction of neutron stars give off a beam of radio radiation, which we see as it roars around. So we call them pulsars. What actually gives off the radio beam in the first place? No one really knows. It probably has something to do with magnetic fields in a young neutron star, and we've found a class called magnetars where the magnetic field would kill you if you got within 1,000 kilometers of one. But yeah, no one has a clue how those magnetic fields get so strong either. So in conclusion, if anyone has an idea on how to get me some rocket tech to visit one in an evening, 60s cartoon villain style, let me know because I'm gonna go get a neutron star. Self-cloning. I want to know if I have a better chance at life if my double or clone is raised by a person who cares, instead of by the awful people who gave my start a huge disadvantage, to put it mildly. No, I'm not blaming them, or even if I am, it's still my job to take care of myself no matter what happened in the past. A person with my IQ and capabilities should be so much more successful instead of gradually having to make it up to zero, to emerge from a black hole of anxiety, self-doubt, and trying to make it as a loner. I want to see what happens with my generous intellectual and creative gifts if I were to actually nurture and mentor myself. Well, I'm just a student studying IT, but I'm still really interested in speciation and evolution. I remember watching a documentary about Hiroshima, I think, and how the insects have went through about 40 generations, so they've adapted to the point where they can filter out radiation. But the horses in the area are filled with it because they haven't had much generations in the radiation. So basically, I want to introduce mice, mainly because they reproduce quickly, into different environments that slowly become harsher and harsher in an attempt to make them evolve. Like, I want to make them completely aquatic, where they no longer need land and are able to live off only seaweed, or where their back legs basically become like a kangaroo that can jump really high to get around. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.